we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com.
Perfect. Thank you.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the L.A. Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, There have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize. Because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sangeeta Shakur.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Wednesday. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've got a huge program today. In our first hour, in just a moment, Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us, taking your calls for the hour. In our second hour, Dana Nuccitelli, an environmental scientist and writer who regularly debunks pseudoscience, is going to be talking about this bizarre Planet of the Humans, Michael Moore, Trash the Environmental Movement movie. And we'll be getting into Trump's new reelection strategy, let the workers die. In our third hour, Sarah Miller is going to be with us. Time to break up everything. There's legislation in Congress and just a general sense that it's time to reverse the monopoly trend. And Paul S. Ryan, the Vice President of Common Cause, will be with us, not the other Paul Ryan, about Bill Barr and Mike Flynn and all this kind of stuff that's going on. But first, Congressman Mark Pocan is with us for the hour, taking your calls, Middays with Mark, here on the Thom Hartmann Program. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of the state of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. And if you'd like to speak with Congressman Pocan, the number is 202-808-9925. And as they say in the radio business, the lines are open. Congressman Pocan, welcome back. I see that there's a huge chunk of legislation here that Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats were announcing last night or yesterday afternoon. You want to tell us about it? And how's everything with you?
Yeah, so I'm doing well, Tom. Thanks for having me again. Friday, Congress will be voting on a Democratic-only bill, and this is different than every other CARES bill we've had where Republicans have come to the table to negotiate. They haven't, so there's going to be a Democratic-only bill that's over 1,800 pages. I think they're calling it the HEROES Act. Before we were calling it CARES 2 in Congress. We never keep any consistency. But anyway, it's the HEROES Act is what it's called now, which is kind of the next stage of things that we're trying to cover for the current times. Largely, it includes things like funding for local and state governments. It includes some things that would address testing, the Postal Service funding, things like that's due, on and on. There's a lot of provisions. But there's also a lot of things that a lot of progressives have advocated for that's not in here. One being the paycheck guarantee proposal that Pramila Jayapal and Senator Warner essentially have introduced that would be like England and Denmark, guaranteeing payroll. Instead, they're using the employee retention tax credit, which I personally am puzzled by because I think it doesn't address things as comprehensively as we need to. And we've, in fact, I've got a call after this with the Ways and Means staff, but they didn't answer some questions I gave them last night very well. And it doesn't include regular payments to people at the levels we were trying. It, again, has a one-time $1,200 payment. But, it goes to people who are working as opposed to, I think, what we really got to be focusing on are people who are hurting right now. So there's some good, there's some bad. There's a lot of we don't know what's in it exactly yet. We just got it. It's 1,800 pages. Even the draft is, I downloaded, is tens of dozens of pages to go through. And we're supposed to travel tomorrow and vote Friday on that bill. I think most people are expecting it to be a pretty partisan vote.
And so you all are going back to D.C. for this. Any progress on being able to work remotely? I mean, I'm concerned.
Well, they're going to do a proxy vote also, but we were told that last time, and they bait and switched us as we flew across the country to come in, Tom. So sometimes I'm not sure, my leadership know that's a good thing to try to attract us so that we can finally get back to work. But, I think there's a lot of frustration, Tom, among members that we weren't all heard as this bill was drafted. And because there's not a clear process for it, Pramila Jayapal and I asked them not to do the vote Friday, to wait till next week, have a full caucus. Speaker Pelosi turned that idea down. A number of us are upset. Some people may vote no. Some people are kind of like voting meh. Like, this isn't real. It's only the Democratic proposal. Why couldn't you have included some better things? And I think Ro Khanna, actually, who I know is on this program a lot, said it really well. No one's really given a good reason why some of these other priorities weren't included. And because we aren't having a full caucus a chance to, there's a call tomorrow when people should be flying to get in. We're really not having a good conversation on it. So, there's many good things. A lot of groups are supporting it. But, Congress needs to get back to functioning, and I think committees are starting to do more remote hearings, and hopefully we're getting there naturally. I just think there's been some frustration on the creation of this bill.
Yeah, remarkable. Well, let's pick up phone calls here.
Sure.
Pat in Watertown, Connecticut. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
How are you?
Hi, Pat.
Hello?
Good. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Good. Hey, I just want to talk about the additional unemployment benefits if it gets extended, if it's going to get to the right people. And I'll follow up with that when you answer that. I mean,
Pat, what is your question?
Well, I have two granddaughters that are like 16 and 17 years old. They work laid off at a restaurant. And they both collect unemployment. Their unemployment benefit would be about $50 a week, and they're each getting $650 a week. And they live with their folks. I just think it's not going to the right people.
Okay. Congressman?
Yeah, I mean, so I think one thing, Pat, I think it's fair to say, and I think everyone would agree, to have it be perfect is going to be really hard to do. But I do agree with the general sentiment. I mean, that's why the $1,200 check to people who are working and doing well right now doesn't make a big difference unless you're really trying to have that be stimulus, but we're not seeing it from the first round through had any stimulative effects. But I do think people who are unemployed right now at no fault of their own, and a small business that doesn't have the demand at no fault of their own, helping them, it really makes a lot of sense. The single best thing you could do is give everyone a job. That's why we had proposals like the paycheck guarantee out there. But short of that through UI, this is to give additional dollars. Otherwise, people can't afford their rent or their mortgage. So you do want to target those folks. And yes, you pointed out a couple examples where maybe it doesn't make as much sense. But it's extending UI, I think, in the general. This is only the surge money is for 4 months, of which about a month or month and a half has already passed by since we passed CARES 1. But in general, I agree with your point that let's focus on the people who really are hurting right now the most, and that is everything from people who are unemployed to small business owners to others who are really affected, knowing that there always are going to be a few things in any definition, without having definitions be 80 pages long, that people might fall through the cracks and people try to take advantage of the system.
We just have a little less than a minute to the next to the break that we're going to hit here. You know, John Maynard Keynes back in the day suggested that the way to get an economy back on track was to hire one guy to dig a hole and hire another guy to fill it and pay them both. You know, knowing that the hole wasn't productive to society, but getting money into their hands would cause them to buy things which would stimulate the economy. In the case of this guy's daughters, isn't that sort of Keynesian stimulus?
Well, let me answer it this way, Tom. I would argue making sure that everyone has a job. If we look at what England and Denmark and Germany are doing, where they're subsidizing their employers who are hurt, who don't have demand right now, to still keep people employed, so that if you keep your regular paycheck, you're able to pay your rent, and then you have no problems back home. That cuts down on unemployment. That cuts down on things like TANF and SNAP programs, food assistance. So ideally, in many ways, a job is the best program we could have. Unfortunately, this proposal is a tax credit, not a job guarantee that the Democrats are proposing.
Okay. 15 minutes past the hour. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. Congressman Pocan is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. His website is Pocan, POCAN.house.gov.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you can tweet him at Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. And welcome back. Morris in Long Beach, California. Morris, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, good morning, Congressman Pocan, and thank you, Thom Hartmann, for taking my call. Congressman, the events of 9/11 produced a $1 billion payment for 3,000 people that were victims of the 9/11 attack. Do you believe, or do you feel that the COVID-19 caretakers and nurses should be given the same treatment? Maybe some funds should be given to those nurses, people who lost their mother, lost their sister, etc. How do you feel about that? Thank you.
Yeah, so I can tell you in the bill that's coming up Friday, I think there is a boost in pay to those workers because clearly people are putting their lives on the line and helping us all as a greater community. But I know there's been reluctance from Republicans previously. So this is in the Democratic proposal that we're voting on. It's not necessarily the real final bill. But I do think, doing something to recognize those people in those professions. And I would argue, don't forget other essential workers. If you're in a grocery store right now and a drive-through, you're also at a greater risk, especially like in the grocery stores and in pharmacies and places. But I don't know. I mean, it's different. 9/11, there was a fund set up for that. I think at this point, just the sheer number already, is somewhat hard because we're having controversy and debate over who's died from COVID-19 and who hasn't. But I think, the emphasis, honestly, in my opinion, should be what Tom and I were just talking about. If everyone had a job, you're largely made whole, you can pay your rent, your mortgage, you have food for your family, that would be the single easiest way to address the vast majority of people. And there's still going to be people that fall through the cracks, and then we've got to have programs for them. I just don't know if we're really addressing it as a nation in the way that is the best equipped to take care of people.
Yeah. Anthony in Detroit, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good afternoon. I just wanted to ask if, this is all about a pandemic and stuff, like has Medicare for All gotten any more traction in the mainstream Democratic caucus? And, because I know they support COVID care for all, so, what's the big jump from that to that?
Great question and great point, Anthony. I think I saw a public poll just in the last 48 hours that showed it was either 67 or 69% of people now support Medicare for All, including a sizable amount of Republicans, because this is really putting the focus on why we need a universal health care system, and we are the only industrialized country that does not have one. So I think the good news is the public is understanding this more. Elected officials, I always would argue, lag behind. If the people lead, eventually the leaders follow. I really believe in that statement, and I think it's good news when you see public opinion polls spike like that. Having said that, again, in the Democratic bill, you're not seeing a lot address that directly. I think there's a reopening of the ACA. There's some other measures to make sure there's no out-of-pocket expenses for COVID health care. But I think this is really making us that 30,000-foot argument about why you want Medicare for all, because, again, anything could happen at any moment to any of us. And I think, the common denominator should be that we all have access to health care. And by access, I mean we have health care. I'm not trying to play the access word. We have health care, period.
And this is a national security issue, too, isn't it?
No question. No question. And if every other industrialized country can do it, I really don't understand why it's still even a debate in the United States.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour, our national town hall meeting, Middays with Mark. With Congressman Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. We'll be right back. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And Melanie in Monroe, Wisconsin, you are on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you. Mark, I'm wondering if you could provide any kind of help through your office or suggestions for my daughter who attends college in California. She lost her job. She needs to pay rent, eat, and she signed up for Wisconsin unemployment because that's where the quarters that it goes back to is Wisconsin, her employment there. And she has signed up for an account on March 22nd. She's had a pending status ever since. She can't get through to them. They don't call her. She's tried the contact forms, no reply. And so now it's going on 2 months, and she's had no benefits paid out to her, and we're running out of money, and we need help. And so we're kind of at a loss to what to do. So is there any help that you can provide through your office to get something moving?
Yeah, Melanie, I'd say, you're in my district, and I'd say give my office a call. However, I'll be honest with you, the unemployment system is run through the state of Wisconsin, and I know that there are long wait lines right now, and they have 600 people, I think, answering calls at all moments, but they're still running into problems, which are pretty obvious right now. It's probably going to be a state connection that you're going to have. So your state legislator might be a good first call, your state rep or your state senator, but we're more than glad to try to help you walk through it and tell you how to best do that. But because it's administered at the state level, it's going to be a state call. I'm about 90% sure.
Wayne in St. Petersburg, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Congressman, for taking my call. My question is regarding Speaker Pelosi. why does Speaker Pelosi consistently side with corporate establishment people first and provide them with resources and everything? And why do your Democratic colleagues keep her in the speakership?
Yeah, well, I honestly, Wayne, I think there's a lot of rhetoric out there. I mean, when you look at the bill coming on Friday, there's a lot of good things in here that help real people. In the first CARES Act, we fought for that additional money for unemployment. We fought for workers and families, and Speaker Pelosi did all of that. Am I upset that it doesn't have the paycheck guarantee bill in here? Yes. Am I upset it doesn't have a more regular payment going to people instead of a one-time $1,200 payment? Yes. But that's with any legislation. And, I do think that, unfortunately, some elements of our caucus get listened to more. People in, competitive districts and committee chairs who might have a bias in a few of these areas, and maybe that's why the bill's not as strong. But Nancy Pelosi wasn't the one advocating for bailing out corporations. That was the Republican majority in the Senate and also the president. But I do wish, she would listen to some of the progressive initiatives more, especially around the paycheck guarantee. I mean, I still think that is the single best thing we could do, much like England and Germany and Denmark. And I think it's a big mistake for us not to be having that in our proposal that we're voting on Friday. So, I think it's fair to criticize where I see the lack of seeing something good. But as I look at much of this, there's a lot of things. I'll bet you would agree with 90 to 95% of what's in the bill. What we really disagree with is what's not in the bill. And I think that's often a judgment call then you have to take a look at and decide how to proceed. So, I think all the progressive groups, Individual Move On, everyone are endorsing the bill. Does that mean they also don't endorse the paycheck guarantee? No. But I do think, there could be things that would be stronger in here. And we have to build, I guess, that popular support to force the speaker and those committee chairs to actually take up these ideas.
David in Lee, Massachusetts. We have just a little over a minute to the break, David. A quick question for Congressman Pocan, please.
Yes, thanks, Tom. I'm wondering if we're going to be bailing out mega banks and corporations and zero-interest loans and all, can we not bring greater pressure on those organizations to become more democratic? In Germany, half the members of the board of directors of a corporation by law have to be voted in by the workers. Why can't we have something like that in the United States? And if we're once again bailing these guys out, don't we have an opportunity to bring that about? Thank you.
Yeah, David, a good point. We put that in our Progressive Caucus proposals for the bill to do just what you're recommending, have some structural changes for people getting money. We did get an oversight board for the federal money, but then we've also watched the president get rid of some of the inspector generals who are kind of the watchdogs on this. So it's a constant fight that we're having, but you're right. When we give that kind of money, there should be some strings attached, especially in industries that traditionally have gotten money and then laid off workers and done things that run counter to what our intention was.
So do you think this is going to be reprised in this new bill, this $3 trillion bill?
I don't see it, no, in this bill, but that's part of the problem is it's 1,800 pages, and I'm going to be flying tomorrow if I go and given no time to actually read it. It's not a great.
You've got some reading to do. Okay, I get it. We're hitting a break here. We'll be back in about 5 minutes. It's Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls for the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin, the U.S. House of Representatives, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Back with more of your calls after this. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is called Let the People Pick the President, The Case for Abolishing the Electoral College by Jesse Wegman. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 20. But what exactly can we do about the Electoral College? People have been trying to answer that question for more than 2 centuries. Since the first proposed amendment to the Electoral College was introduced in Congress in 1797, there have been more than 700 attempts to reform or abolish it, more by far than any other provision of the Constitution. Only one has succeeded, the 12th Amendment, which was ratified in 1804 to fix a technical flaw in the college's design, but left it otherwise intact. In the late 1960s, an amendment abolishing the college and replacing it with a national popular vote passed the House of Representatives and came extraordinarily close in the Senate, but was blocked by a filibuster. At the time, 80% of the American public supported switching to the popular vote, as did President Richard Nixon and other top Republicans and Democrats. To some, this litany of failures speaks to itself. I think it's a waste of time to talk about changing the Electoral College, former President Jimmy Carter said in 2000. Carter had supported a national popular vote in the 60s and the 70s. I would predict that 200 years from now we'll still have the Electoral College, he said. Was President Carter right? Is it simply our fate as Americans to remain trapped by the historical quirks of a Constitution that is too easy to revere and too hard to change? Especially after the failed effort in the 60s, when American politics were far less polarized to today and there was no simple partisan divide over the issue. It's clear that a constitutional amendment is not in the cards. But there may be another way. It's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, an agreement among states to award all of their electors to the winner of the national popular vote rather than the winner of their statewide vote. The compact will take effect when it is joined by states representing a majority of electoral votes, 270, thus guaranteeing that the candidate who wins the most votes in the country becomes president. The ingenuity of the compact is that it doesn't touch the Constitution. Its target is the statewide winner-take-all rule, currently in use in 48 states. Maine and Nebraska are the exceptions. This rule is what makes presidents out of popular vote losers. It incentivizes presidential campaigns to ignore more than 100 million American voters living in non-competitive states, turning what should be a national electoral contest into a series of bitter hyperlocal brawls. It focuses nearly all campaign spending and policy proposals on a few so-called battleground states, where even a small shift in voting can lead to an electoral jackpot for one side or another. That familiar red and blue map we all obsess over every 4 years, it's nothing but a visual representation of state winner-take-all rules, with each state stamped Democratic or Republican, as though that is its true identity, regardless of how many voters from the other party cast a ballot there. This is bad for democracy, and it should concern all Americans, no matter where they live or which political party they support. In contrast, when candidates know that all votes are equal, and they need a majority of them to win, they're forced to seek the support of all Americans and craft policies that appeal to as many people as possible. The Popular Vote Compact was launched in 2006 and got its first member state, Maryland, the following year. As of October 2019, 15 states in the District of Columbia, together representing 196 electoral votes, had joined. 74 more, and the compact takes effect. So far, only Democratic majority states have joined the compact. And while the 2016 election dealt a significant setback to efforts to enlist Republican-led states, lawmakers of both parties around the country continue to support it, and Republican-led chambers have passed it in 4 states. Critics of the compact call it an end run around the Constitution. And it's true that the Constitution's framers never mentioned something like a popular vote compact. They also never mentioned the winner-take-all rule, but that didn't stop the majority of states from rapidly adopting it to benefit themselves. That's the whole point of the compact. The framers gave states near total control over how to allocate their electors. The fact that the compact is an agreement among states also means that, unlike a constitutional amendment, which is effectively permanent, member states may back out if they later decide they don't want to be a part of it. Opponents of the popular vote argue that no matter how you might achieve it, it's not the way our country is built. As the popular saying goes, we're a republic, not a democracy. The Electoral College is one of the core Republican elements of the framers' constitutional design, like the Senate and the Supreme Court, which are there precisely to prevent majorities from running rampant. In other words, majority rule is not our only organizing principle, and perhaps not even our most important. There are 2 problems, however, with this argument. The minor one is on the surface and involves terminology. The United States is both a republic and a representative democracy. The 2 terms describe the same thing: a government in which the people hold the ultimate power but elect representatives to make laws, policies, and other decisions on their behalf. The founders used the term republic to distinguish what they were building from a monarchy. For them, democracy generally referred to the direct variety, as in ancient Athens or the New England town meeting, where the people literally make the laws themselves. But American politics at the national level has never been and never will be a direct democracy. So any distinction between the terms today is meaningless. As one political columnist put it, to say that the U.S. is a republic and not a democracy is like claiming to eat beef and pork, but not cows and pigs. The bigger problem with the saying is the implication that lies beneath it. The book, Let the People Pick the President, by Jesse Wegman.
Coming up on the Science Revolution this week, entomologist Professor Gard W. Otis is here on the murder hornets. They invade hives and decapitate the bees inside in just a matter of hours, and scientists worry about them gaining a foothold in North America. Beyond nuclears, Kevin Camps drops by on the announcement of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission that it's proceeding illegally with licensing a proposed high-level radioactive waste dump in New Mexico. Plus, author Stephen Hassan on the cult of Trump. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. It's Middays with Mark, our national town hall meeting with the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, Congressman Mark Pocan, and Tony in St. Petersburg, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Tony? Oh, Tony's listening to his radio, not his phone. Josh in Boulder, Colorado. Josh, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Representative Pocan, Elizabeth Warren just signed on to Cory Booker's Farm System Reform Act, which would stop new concentrated animal feeding operations from opening, and existing large CAFOs would be phased out by 2040. Last week, Ro Khanna and Jamie Raskin introduced companion legislation in the House. Will you support this legislation, or if not, please explain why you support factory farms?
Josh, if it was introduced last week, I guarantee I have not seen the bill, and this is the first time I've heard of the bill. We're busy dealing with the COVID-19 stuff right now, so I will take a look at it, but I don't know anything about the bill at all.
David in Spotswood, New Jersey. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for taking my call. Hey, I read in April 8th copy of the Bloomberg Online that Japan has allocated $2.2 billion to relocate its production out of China to the United States. Being that, we get a good share of our medicine, PPP, ventilators, and all other things that are essential to national security, why aren't we doing the same thing? Why isn't it in the bill that is being proposed by the Democrats? Why aren't we relocating production from China back to the U.S. as part of reinvigorating our economy? Thanks.
Yeah, and Japan is relocating it back to Japan. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, part of the question is, do you incentivize a company that already had a bad practice of taking jobs out of the U.S.? I do think we absolutely have to produce more in the United States. That's been my entire career in the state legislature and Congress, especially as someone who's a strong union advocate. Those are all jobs we should have here. Now we're seeing the problems with everything from medical devices to pharmaceuticals to PPEs and reagents that we're having shortages of, only produced in China. And when I asked Secretary Azar the question on prescription drugs, whether or not we should be producing them in the United States, his response was something like, well, it could cost as much as a penny a pill more. Well, too bad, so sad. When you pay $1,000 a pill for the pill that cures hepatitis C and you need to take it 90 days in a row, 1 penny is hardly a problem, right, to have a consistent supply in the United States. So I think there are many reasons why we should be producing more of these goods here. I think the real debate is, do you then incentivize a company that already did a bad practice by making the jobs leave here, and they're probably not paying taxes here either because they've done that to avoid taxes? Do we incentivize them that way, or do we just start creating more goods here and requiring it to be? I mean, I'm introducing a bill, I believe, next week or this Friday, because the president's not using the Defense Production Act to do the very things that you just mentioned that we need here. I want to have Congress make the president. We can't do it ourselves. It has to be the president. but we can make the president have to do it because he's not doing the right thing by not making companies produce these goods when we need them right now, because this is certainly no different than being at a time of war as far as needing the production. We need to be able to say that as Congress if the president won't get it right. So I agree with the premise of what you're saying, whether or not giving them cash incentives to come back here after they already did something they shouldn't have, I think is a bigger debate, and we should, though, have that debate.
Nikki in Joplin, Missouri, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Nikki? Okay, I'm going to put Nikki on hold, too. She's online, too. Linda, New Brunswick, New Jersey. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm so excited to be on your show. Thank you both for taking my call. My question is, I'm excited about the election coming up in November, and now I'm concerned because they're saying that Russia has its hand in our elections, trying to manipulate the vote. I am really concerned that if I vote, my vote's not going to count. What are we doing about that? It's not enough to say, well, we want to do this, but the president says we can't do it, so we can't do it. I don't understand that. I am concerned.
Thank you, Linda.
I'm sorry, Linda, could you say that question in one sentence? I apologize. I had a separate text coming in from something on the bill that's coming up Friday. I apologize.
She said she's concerned that there was a big segment on this on Joe Scarborough's show this morning about how Russia has apparently successfully infiltrated the election systems of pretty much all of our states. And she's concerned that her vote is going to get manipulated or not counted.
Yeah, so, we know from last time that they tried to break into many systems. The thing is they didn't have success, though, from the reports we got back, including our intelligence reports on that. So I still believe that, obviously everyone should vote, and that should absolutely not be a barrier to anyone voting. In fact, if anything, it should make you want to get out all the more so that we can have our votes out there. It's the big reason why the Democrats, and I've been especially strong advocate for having a paper receipt to every electronic voting machine, so that we actually have a way to recount, so that even if they try to do something, we have a way to get around anything they would do. Many machines do have that, but not all machines, and that should be an absolute requirement so that we have a verifiable, auditable way to make sure that votes are counted. So I think those are some good strategies if your local community or state doesn't have, try to advocate for. But so far, I have not seen something from our intelligence briefings that are telling us that we have a reason yet to worry, and we didn't 4 years ago, because, again, they tried, they weren't successful, and it is a little trickier than just breaking into the system to be able to, I think, do the scale of what they would obviously like to do.
Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you for taking my call, Mr. Pocan. Nice to listen to you, Tom. This morning I wake up like I usually do, and I listen to Squawk Box, and Rob Portman's on there. And he's complaining this $3 trillion, we can't afford it. Deficits are rising, we're just breaking the bank. But yet in the second sentence, we'll go $3 trillion just in infrastructure. I hope you Democrats ain't going to go along with that, because there's got to be a red line with this guy, with this Republican senator. They're willing to put $3 trillion just in infrastructure for their rich friends, but not a dime for the working class or to help the states out. What do you say about that?
Yeah, Russ, it's two things. One, I don't take Republicans credibly on deficits or debts anymore, because when they passed the tax cuts, they proved that they've been lying the entire time. So, I don't take them very credibly when they say something can't add or should add to it. I will say one thing, though, Russ, is when it's very likely, Russell, that we're going to have an infrastructure bill that will be pretty sizable at some point. maybe not this next bill because we're still in mitigation, but we will have a big bill, and we need to because we're seriously behind in our infrastructure. That doesn't just go to the wealthiest folks. That creates millions and millions of jobs across the country and helps make sure that we have roads and bridges and schools and broadband and water delivery systems that deliver clean water. So I just don't want anyone to think investment in infrastructure somehow just helps the wealthy. Quite the opposite. I think it helps the country as a whole. But I don't think that's the solution, short of helping people who are really hurting right now, which is the many, many people who are unemployed at no fault of their own. Those are the folks that we really have to put our emphasis on.
Arnie in Palm Springs, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman Pocan, hi. I have a body full of blood that I would like to donate. People are asking for donations all the time, and apparently I can't because I'm gay. I understand that all the blood samples are always checked anyway before they're put into the blood system. Why is that law still in effect?
Yeah, Arnie, I should know this better than I'm going to give you an answer, and I'm going to apologize up front, but I know they just changed it somewhat to a much shorter amount of time, but still that doesn't make sense for the very reason you said. The blood is checked in the supply, and again, it's insulting and discriminatory, the practice that's been out there. So there has been a recent change that says if someone's been with another person, that the amount of time you're supposed to wait to give blood is seriously reduced. I think it should go away completely. You're completely right on it, but there was a recent change, and I wish I could tell you the exact amount of time, and I don't have it because I think people are realizing it doesn't make sense to have that law in place. So
they're using monogamy as a benchmark or
Only
a metric? Do they do
state.
that with straight people?
No, exactly. And that's the point. And they took it from, I think it was a year before, to, I want to say it's like 6 weeks now. And it still doesn't make sense, but they did just change it. I just wish I remember what the change amount of time was. Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin has been very active working on this nationally as well. But it makes no sense that you have a discriminatory policy that
Yeah, remarkable. 45 minutes past the hour, middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, the big cheese progressive in Washington, D.C., representing the state of Wisconsin. Pocan.house.gov. Rep. Mark Pocan
You're
on Twitter.
Listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan. Stick around. And welcome back. Tom in North Hollywood, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, Mark and Tom. First off, we the people are the government, and I strongly believe that. I just think I want to know what you think about the fact that I understand the reality of money in politics, and politicians have to have money in order to get elected, and the whole sickness of Citizens United and everything. But maybe what needs to happen, and I don't need your endorsement on this or anything, because I know that you're in a tough position, but what if all these essential workers, the grocery store workers, the Target workers, the Walmart workers, all did a general strike where they just did not show up for work? Would that actually get the attention of the Congress to know that we the people are the government rather than the corporate masters that actually do their bidding?
Yeah, Tom, it's a provocative point because at what point do you make sure people are heard, right? And all too often, you are completely right when it comes to money in politics. You know, in the state legislature in Wisconsin, I was the author of 100% public financing of elections. I think the only way you're really going to clean elections up is to take money completely out and just have small dollar donations and otherwise use government funding to fund minimalist campaigns so that you can actually have a system that works. The problem is, obviously, there's some challenges with the Supreme Court we've got to overcome, and that means Democrats are going to have to step up if we want the current system. And it seems to be a very personal, although you might call it selfish, position to try to get them to change. So it has been difficult. But again, if I had my druthers, it would be 100% public financing, maybe some very small, low-dollar, under $50 donations, so that absolutely you take away the power of the special interest and the wealthiest and make it so that anyone can run for office based on your ideas.
1 minute to the break. Sarah in Long Beach, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks. Appreciate that, and I thank you for your time. Congressman Pocan, I have an idea about paying off the student loan. I mentioned it the other day on Tom's program. It's about having a committee. I want to know what you think about this. 1-800 number with a committee that combines the Department of Finance, taxes, or the Department of Education at a state level. And anyone who wanted to make a tax-deductible donation to pay off the student debt goes directly to pay off the student debt, not mine, not this person or that person, but all of it. If they could get a committee to take the number and people just give, and whatever kind of write-off the states could come up with or what kind of gift tax, whatever that they could give back to the millionaires, it's going to be overnight if we could pay off this debt. What do you think about that?
Yeah, sorry, I don't know if it would be overnight doing that. I understand what you're saying, and I think there's some reasonableness to it. I would also argue let's just not create the debt to begin with so that you don't have to worry about dealing with it. But you're being very pragmatic, and there's a lot of student debt we got to deal with separately. I think you also have to deal with the front end of it.
We'll be right back with more of your calls for Congressman Mark Pocan. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Stick around. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. Everybody knows about the war that billionaire oligarchs and giant corporations have waged against working class Americans since the Reagan Revolution. But there's a big piece of that most Americans don't know. It has to do with a racist guy named Robert Bork who convinced Congress and the Supreme Court to change our laws about monopolies. You can read all about it in my new book, The Hidden History of American Monopoly, available for pre-sale right now wherever fine books are sold. So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at thomhartmann.com, I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now. And this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating. Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan here taking your calls for the hour. And let's see here, Claire in Land of Lakes, Florida. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Actually, it's Clay in Land Lakes, Florida. And greetings
Clay,
to
my
Congressman.
apologies, Clay.
That's okay. Greetings to you, Congressman and Tom. I appreciate you taking my call. I know that Richard Wolff comes on your show, but I'm not sure that the congressman listens to his program. He did promote in his last program that I heard a solution to putting people back to work and at the same time addressing the issue we're having with our pandemic, and that we would educate people to become testers. We would educate people to become contact investigators and spend the monies on those things, because testing is so important to try to control what's happening now. So why isn't Congress looking at a way to go to such a program where we go ahead and invest in educating people or in how to do this and putting them to work. That would be a great way to stimulate the economy and put a bunch of people back to work, since we have 30 million of them out of work.
Yeah, Clay, I mean, that is happening, but you're never going to get 30 million jobs with that. Even like in Wisconsin, we're hiring 1,000 people to do contact tracing. We're about 2% of the population, times that by 50, and you're not getting anywhere close to the unemployment. I truly believe the single best way to deal with unemployment is by making sure that those employers who no longer have the demand still are able to pay their employees, and that's through a national paycheck guarantee like Germany, England, Denmark are doing. If we did that, then you don't have people on unemployment, you don't have people on SNAP food assistance, so you're saving on all those areas. People still have a job, and they're largely made whole, and we'll be hiring people to do some of those things that you just talked about that we need to for the pandemic. Unfortunately, I don't see that proposal still making it to as high up as it needs to, and I think because of that, we're going to continue to have unemployment. I just don't think unemployment insurance is an answer to this crisis, right? I think jobs are an answer to this crisis.
Brad in Madison, Wisconsin. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
I served as part of Desert Storm and War on Terror. Americans do not need to buy 2,500 F-35s. Not when we have thousands more jets than any other nation already. Our military spending is far more than any nation. Our bases, we have 95% of the foreign bases in the world are U.S. bases, and a lot of them just happen to be around the coast of China and Russia, and that includes the NATO bases too, which we kind of control that. So I ask you, will you help us grow an anti-war movement? I know you're on the cutting edge in the Congress of anti-war legislation.
Yeah, Brad, it's interesting you say that. We have a letter right now that Barbara Lee and I have done to the chair of the Armed Services Committee, asking if they can reduce the number for allocation for defense spending this year, specifically because we need money for COVID-19, which also one could consider an attack on this country. In the last 3 years, we've increased defense spending 20% in this country, Tom, at a time of peace, and I think that's ridiculous. And now may be the opportunity to try to cut that number back from, I think it's $738 billion was in the last budget, and I forget what the number adjusts to. I think it might be the same number for this year, but this would be a good opportunity and a good reason to scale that number back. I think we have 20 people who've signed that letter so far. Brad, we're on the same wavelength. We're talking about that right now. This is that opportunity. Also, real quickly, with the sequester law ending for the next budget, I believe it is, that's one that tied defense and non-defense spending together. They'll be separated again. This is our opportunity to try to really scale back those dollars because I agree. I think we put way too much spending into defense at a time that we really need to invest it in priorities domestically.
Congressman, we have only 1 minute to the end of the hour. What should we be looking at and where should we be focusing our personal activism over the next week or so until we next talk with you?
Yeah, I think as always be heard. If you think the national paycheck guarantee is a good idea, call your member of Congress or the Senate and say that. If you think it's a good idea to give payments on a regular basis to people, call your member of Congress or the Senate and say that. And then continue to be active locally because I think the most impact you can have still is locally. And I think with some of these states and localities opening up a little too quickly, we risk having spikes in numbers again. So just be heard, be active at every level possible. This is really one of the most important times to be doing that.
Yeah, and make sure that you're registered to vote. And is there a way that we can lobby states to have vote by mail?
Absolutely. All these, this is the time to be heard. The thing is, some legislatures are out of session, but they may have to come back if we pass more bills because there's tweaks that have to happen. Don't let anyone tell you they can't do it in the states because I think they can still, no matter what.
Great. Congressman, thanks so much for being with us today. Great talking with you. Thank you.
Of course. Tom, as always, thank you. Take care.
Yep. Have a great afternoon. We'll be back. We're going to, we've got a huge show today. Up next, Dana Nuccitelli about science and climate change.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
So the story that we've been told by rich people in the United States, these libertarian billionaires for years and years and years, is that if we just got rid of government and didn't think about all of us being in this little kind of boat together here, the free market and individual enterprise will take care of problems. It'll solve everything. We're starting to see the outlines of that solution now. Margaret Thatcher famously said, there's no such thing as society, it's just a collection of individuals. That is the libertarian sales pitch. So what happens when the libertarians have their way, as they have had for the last 40 years in the United States since the election of Ronald Reagan and the ending of Keynesian economics in the United States? They have successfully prevented us from having a national health care system. They have successfully prevented us from having a strong social safety net. So when depressions happen or epidemics happen, people have, they're caught as they fall, essentially. They don't end up homeless or hungry or without access to health care. They have prevented all those things from happening. And now we're looking at a really difficult time in America. And these rich people who told us, don't worry, and in fact, let private charity deal with everything. You shouldn't have welfare programs. You shouldn't have food stamps. It should all be private charity. Well, the guys who would provide that private charity, they're the billionaires. I mean, there's three men in the United States are worth more than the bottom half of America. So what are they doing? Well, here it is, the headline from The Guardian. Superjet rich off to disaster bunkers amid coronavirus outbreak. Robert Vicino, founder and chief executive of Vivos Group, a California-based company constructing underground shelters designed to withstand a range of natural disasters and catastrophes, said his firm has seen a surge in inquiries and sales since the crisis took hold. They're offering space right now in 575 concrete bunkers in an abandoned World War II ordnance depot in South Dakota. Quintessentially is a concierge company for millionaires that provides concierge jet services. And quintessentially said one of its members had converted his home into a military-style bunker and was refusing any visitors unless they could provide detailed records of their movements and contacts. The article starts out, the world's richest people are chartering private jets to set off for specially prepared disaster bunkers in countries that so far appear to have avoided the worst of the COVID-19 outbreak. They are taking personal doctors and nurses on their flights to treat them and their families in the event they become infected. And then they talk about, this is in the UK, Mark Alley, who is the chief executive and medical director of the private Harley Street Clinic. Now, this would be private, meaning that it's not part of the National Health Service. And therefore, it's basically the concierge medicine. He said, this has led to huge demand from wealthy people asking if they can pay for private testing. The problem is that in the UK right now, the government is only allowing the test to be administered by the National Health Service. So you got to get in line, basically. However, an employee at another Harley Street practice, where these rich private medical practices, who declined to be named, said their clinic had arranged for concerned clients to be tested in other countries or for samples to be sent abroad for testing. Another one, this is Ali again. This is the private doc. He said his clinic is also offering the worried wealthy an intravenous infusion of vitamins and minerals to boost their immune systems. The treatment costs $350. So this is their answer. Flee. Leave all the rest of us to swelter through and perhaps die in some sort of Hobbesian hellhole, essentially. It's like, something out of Hieronymus Bosch. That's their idea, right? Just let the rabble die. Oh, libertarians, they are so wonderful, aren't they? I am so looking forward to the day when Americans look back on this moment in time and say, wow, we had no idea how screwed up these people are and what kind of damage their insane philosophy would do to America. But now that we saw 40 years of Reaganomics, we've had enough. And it's time to bring our society together like they've done in Northern Europe. I really look forward to that. Thanks so much for supporting our program and for watching this. So we've got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com. So we've got a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com for people who support our program, and it's there's a really troubling concatenation of events, events, that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE to, or whoever's running them, to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at ThomHartmann.com.
Okay, we're recording now.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And this is Dana Nuccitelli, the environmental scientist, writer, and author of Climatology versus Pseudoscience, a regular contributor to the Yale Center for Environmental Communication, The Guardian, and Skeptical Science. Plus, Dana has a master's degree in physics from UC Davis. YaleClimateConnections.org is his website. Dana1981 at Yahoo. I'm sorry, that's the wrong name. Dana1981 is your Twitter handle. I've got it. There we go. Dana, welcome to the program. I wanted to talk to you about Michael Moore's, or it's called Michael Moore's movie. He didn't make it. Apparently, he's promoting or put his name on it or something. And I was horrified when I watched this thing. But for people who haven't watched it, don't know what we're talking about here, you want to give us a brief sketch, and then let's get into it.
Sure, thanks, Tom. Just a brief note that I'm just speaking on my behalf and not on behalf of Yale or anybody else. So basically, the premise of the film is that renewable energy like solar and wind power is no better than burning fossil fuels, and it's all just an illusion. And so we should just keep going with the status quo and instead work on other. I mean, they don't really propose any other solutions, but they kind of imply that some sort of end to growth is the solution we should be aiming for rather than shifting to cleaner technologies. That's the basic summary of the film.
Okay, and you can build a strong argument that the growth and the way that we grow and even population growth are all mitigating factors in this. And the movie does point out basically the scam of wood chip biomass. But outside of that, it seems like the basic message is, had these guys been making a movie about Thomas Edison back in the 1890s, they'd be saying, his light bulb it looks kind of nice, but it only burns for about 25 minutes. And, we should just go back to candles. It doesn't, and in fact, many of the statistics are way out of date. Those are some of my immediate thoughts. What is your specific critique of this documentary?
There are a lot of very misleading scenes in there, but a lot of the scenes that look at clean technologies like solar panels and wind turbines, they were filmed kind of around the year 2010, and these technologies have improved so fast, they've become so much cheaper and more efficient that if you're only looking at the technology from a decade ago, it's completely misrepresentative of what it can do today. Like solar panels have become something like 70-80% cheaper over the past decade, which is not mentioned anywhere in the film. They just do this a couple scenes looking at solar panels that are over a decade old, and it gives the impression that these are outdated, inefficient technologies that are. It's sort of like looking at cell phones and just looking at flip phones and saying, well, flip phones are terrible, and so cell phones are just not worthwhile. When technology improves really fast, so you have to keep updating it. If you're going to release a film in 2020, it has to represent the state of technology in 2020, not in 2010. So that's one problem. Another problem is just at one point they make the claim that because fossil fuels are required to kind of manufacture and install these clean technologies, that it's no better than just continuing to burn fossil fuels in power plants, which is it's an absurdly wrong claim, because scientists do things called life cycle assessments that look at the carbon footprint associated with these things: manufacturing, installation, lifelong operation, and decommissioning of all kinds of power plants. And these life cycle assessments show that renewable technologies like wind and solar have a much, much, much smaller overall lifetime carbon footprint than coal and natural gas do, something like 20 times smaller. But the film doesn't do any kind of these quantitative assessments. It doesn't compare the numbers. It just says, well, because the carbon footprint of solar and wind isn't zero, then it's no better than a coal-burning power plant, which is completely ridiculous. And just that's the most misleading claim in the entire film. It's just flat out insanely false.
Yeah, and when this documentary first came out, it screened at one of the big film festivals. It does go after a couple of sacred cows in the Green Movement, specifically Al Gore and Bill McKibben, and essentially accuses them of being less than honest or being on the take. Both of them, and specifically with regard to biomass, both of them have loudly, publicly reversed or walked away from any position on biomass, and in every other regard, it seems like these are just really great people who are doing good work. And after the film came out, and they walked back those positions, but then continued doing what they're doing, which I salute. My understanding is that Michael Moore pulled this film out of distribution, but then it just went over to YouTube, which is where some 5 million people have seen it now. What's the story here with this thing? How did this film get made? Why is Michael Moore's name on it?
Jeff Gibbs was the director, but Michael Moore was the producer on it. So I think Jeff Gibbs did most of the work and kind of brought Michael Moore on board with it. I believe there's a group called Films for Action that had originally distributed it, and then they pulled it, and then they decided that they didn't want to get the kind of backlash and to draw more attention to it by pulling it, so they put it back on to their distribution website. But it's primarily been viewed on YouTube. I think it's been viewed more than 7 million times on YouTube. It hasn't been picked up by very many other distributors, probably because of the very misleading nature of it. The attacks, especially on Bill McKibben, are pretty ridiculous, because Bill McKibben has spent basically his entire career trying to slow climate change, and it paints him as this villain who's trying to burn entire forests for energy or something like that. In the past, he has, in some cases, supported using wood-burning facilities for small energy production. But, in his defense, it's a very complicated issue, because there are ways to burn wood sustainably. If you're using waste wood that's harvested that's not suitable for other uses, then it can be done sustainably. It's just that in practice it hasn't been done sustainably, and that's why more groups and individuals have kind of come out against burning wood for energy, just because in practice it hasn't been done very sustainably. And so that's why, since somewhere around 2016, Bill McKibben has very strongly been against burning wood for fuel. And again, this film came out in 2020, and for the last 4 years, he's been very strong against it. And the film at no point mentioned that. It portrayed him as this wood burning villain who's trying to basically clear cut forests and burn them for energy, which is just not at all.
Yeah, and it's particularly weird given that the go-to message of the film is cut growth, cut population, and Bill McKibben's first book was titled Just One. It was a plea to only have one child.
Yeah, exactly. His entire career, he's been trying to find the best possible solutions, and at one point, in the past, it seemed like burning wood, if done sustainably, could be a viable solution, at least on small scales. And things change again, technologies change, and our practices change, and people change their opinions accordingly. And so, I don't know why they decided to make him out as a villain in the film. And there's a similar story for Al Gore, who again, for his career, is trying to do what he could to solve the climate crisis, and nobody's perfect, but they're all doing their best. And to portray them as villains, like on the same footing as the Koch brothers or something like that, is just it's really ridiculous.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. And I lived in Vermont for 10 years, and we heated with wood. A lot of people do.
Right.
But we also had some acreage, and we cut our own wood, and I split it but that's a whole different thing than the whole power plant thing. Anyhow, it's fascinating, and I wanted to get the message out there that if you've seen this movie, you're only getting a fraction of the story, and you need to get the rest of the story. Dana Nuccitelli, environmental scientist, writer, author of Climatology versus Pseudoscience, regular contributor to all kinds of sites, including The Guardian, YaleClimateConnections.org. Thank you, Dana. Thanks for dropping by today.
Thanks, Tom.
Good talking with you. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Stick around. We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, and boy, do we have a pile of news to get through. Stick around. And welcome back. Jeff in Portland. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Another great show.
Thank you.
Before my question, since you're a big pro-labor guy, as am I wanted to give you a heads up. There was an excellent piece in this past weekend's Detroit Free Press marking the 50th anniversary of his death. Free Press writer Jamie LaRose, she did a great piece on the life and career of Walter Reuther, and it's titled Walter Reuther's Family. Yeah, it's titled Walter Reuther's Family Says of the UAW Icon, He Never Sold Out. It's really a fascinating piece, and the guy really did amazing work to build the middle class. So I recommend it highly.
Cool. I'll check it out. When I grew up in Michigan, and he was like one of our heroes.
Well, I think there used to be a freeway named after him in Detroit, and I would assume it's still there. Yeah. So and Jimmy Hoffa gets all the movies. I'd like to see a Walter Reuther movie. Maybe Michael Moore can redeem himself and do a movie on Walter Reuther.
Something like that.
Yeah, but my question, Tom, is regarding the new relief bill. Doubling the $1,200 and making it monthly rather than a one-time payment, and expanding Medicare rather than subsidizing COBRA would be two areas that I would start to address. And Congressman Pocan, he did say we should call our individual members of Congress. But Tom, what do you think about calling the Progressive Caucus leaders as well, and asking them to prioritize some improvements and whip the Progressive Caucus to hold out until we get them in this bill? The Progressive Caucus is triple the size that the so-called Freedom Caucus was, and look at what they did to transform the Republican Party. Don't you think we should be exerting pressure to get the Progressive Caucus to unite and coalesce around two or three major improvements to this bill?
They are largely united, Jeff, and they are supportive of specifics both in principle and in legislation. The difference is that the Freedom Caucus was basically an astroturf organization put together by right-wing billionaires, by a small group of right-wing billionaires, and you know who I'm talking about. And so anything that they did, they had a multi-million-dollar PR machine behind them. Every event that they staged, they had all the necessary trappings to draw the press, right down to instant crowds and everything else. And there is no such funding for the Congressional Progressive Caucus. They are struggling to get by. They don't have billionaire backers. It's the continual frustration of people on the left.
Yeah, I understand that, Tom, and it's not a true apples to apples comparison. But this bill is just a starting point in negotiations. So when you start, without offering your best stuff, you're going to end up...
That's my objection to it, Jeff, and forgive me for interrupting, but we're going to hit a break here in a second. My objection to this legislation is that the Democrats put on the table what they thought was acceptable to Republicans and what they wanted. And instead, what they should have said is, we want $6 trillion. We want Medicare for every single person in the United States. We want to do like Australia is doing. Every single person in the country who has held a job in the last 24 months gets $3,000 a month. Period, full stop, or their pay, whichever is greater, or whichever is less, and just go for it, and then let the Republicans negotiate them back. But Democrats don't do that, I guess.
Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Wanted to just lay out this, one of my big concerns. I just mentioned to a caller a minute ago, the Democrats are putting forward this $3 trillion bill. Frankly, what they keep doing, and we saw the same thing in the Obamacare negotiations, we've seen it over and over and over again with Democrats, is, they keep assuming that Republicans are going to be reasonable. And so they come up with legislation that they say, here's a reasonable compromise. We'll fund COBRA instead of Medicare for All, for example, even though COBRA is absurdly more expensive. But hey, it's going to pass some money along to the insurance companies, and they're big funders of not only some of the Democrats, but most of the Republicans. So, we'll do that. We'll give you that. What they should have done is they should have said, we want it all. We want a $6 trillion piece of legislation. We want Medicare for every single American in the United States starting tomorrow morning. We want what Australia is doing, $3,000 for every person. No conditions, no catches, no gotchas. We want that now. And then let them negotiate back to a midpoint, because what they're going to have to do now that they put this $3 trillion bill out is now they're going to have to negotiate with Mitch McConnell. He's going to whittle it down to $2 trillion or $1 trillion or less than that. And, it's really unfortunate. At the same time, look at what's going on in the Labor Department. This is mind-boggling. Donald Trump put Anthony Scalia's son, Eugene, in charge of the Labor Department. Anthony Scalia, of course, died, when he was in the Supreme Court in that, shoot the penned animals resort down in Texas sometime back. But his son is a lawyer who has been working against organized labor most of his life. And, a strong opponent of organized labor, Eugene Scalia, he is now in charge of the Labor Department. I mean, this is what Reagan did. Reagan put a guy in charge of the Labor Department, or the first head of the Labor Department ever who didn't believe in organized labor. You know, Trump obviously doing the same thing. And now Scalia's Labor Department is advising the states that if people are unwilling to come back to work because they think that their workplace is not safe from the coronavirus, the states should rat them out and pull their unemployment benefits. The memo from the Labor Department says, and I quote, "States are encouraged to request employers to provide information when workers refuse to return to their jobs for reasons that do not support their continued eligibility for benefits," end quote. Trump is determined to get the economy open again before the election, even if it kills America's working people. Donald Trump doesn't care about anybody's life except his own, and never has. And frankly, I'm strongly of the opinion that that's true of basically the entire Republican Party. Only sociopaths need apply, right, to become Republican elected officials. It's really mind-boggling. Prior to the pandemic, Jessica Glenza, writing over at Microsoft News, MSN.com, prior to the pandemic, 160 million Americans, roughly half our population, got their medical insurance through their jobs. Now, 30 million Americans have lost their jobs. Presumably, you know, if half of them or a little more than half of them got their employment, got their health insurance through their employment, now that they're unemployed, you've got, you know, probably somewhere between 50 and 20 million Americans who no longer have, insurance, health insurance. And you know, the best estimates, the Urban Institute and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation did the math on this, and it's fairly complex. And what they found is that anywhere from 25 to 43 million Americans could lose their health insurance over the next month or so as a result of this recession. And it's far worse in Republican-led states than in blue states where Medicaid has been expanded. So let's just expand Medicare. Let's lower the eligibility age to 0 for any family that has had an unemployment claim verified. Any family that is drawing unemployment benefits right now should be eligible. When you are eligible for unemployment, you are eligible for Medicare. Let's just do this. Do it very straightforward, very clean. You know, no need to mess around. Just lay it out. So there's that. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is hiding this coronavirus task force report. This came out on May 7th, back last Thursday. And it says that the top 10 areas where we're seeing an increase in coronaviruses in the United States recorded surges of 72.4% over that 7-day period. That includes Nashville, Tennessee, Des Moines, Iowa, Amarillo, Texas, 650% increase in Central City, Kentucky, Charlotte, North Carolina, Kansas City, Missouri, Omaha and Lincoln, Nebraska, Minneapolis, Montgomery, Alabama, Columbus, Ohio, and Phoenix, Arizona. This report, just Charlotte and Kansas City, 200% increases in coronavirus. Yet Trump is saying everything's good, it's magically going to go away, don't worry, summer's coming, it's going to be gone just like the cold and the flu, get back to work. And then when the report came out, the Trump administration said, no, we're not going to release that report, we're going to deep six that report. I'm telling you, they don't care about the lives of Americans. They genuinely don't. Stalin said 1 death is a tragedy, 1 million deaths is a statistic. Trump is making that his mantra.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I'll pick up your phone calls after the break. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Crusaders, The Epic History of the Wars for the Holy Lands by New York Times bestselling author Dan Jones. This is from Chapter 1. It begins the book, The Count and the Imam. Count Roger of Sicily lifted his leg and farted. "By the truth of my religion," he exclaimed, "there is more use in that than in what you are here to say." His advisors stood chastened and a little perplexed. The Count before them was in his late 40s and salted to his bones with the experience of military campaign in southern Italy and the islands of the central Mediterranean. As a young warrior, he had been described by one flatterer as tall and well-made, a most fluent speaker, shrewd in counsel, far-sighted in the planning of things to be done, cheerful and pleasant to everyone. In middle age, he had hardened somewhat and was not one to waste his words on fools. The plan the advisors had recommended had seemed like a good one, as courtiers' plans very often do, before they are shredded by the critiques of short-tempered potentates. Not far across the sea from Sicily, roughly 75 miles at the closest point, lay the remains of what had in ancient times been called Carthage, afterwards the Roman province of Africa, and now in the 11th century, Ifriqiya. Its cities, including the capital Mahdia and on the coast, and Cairaun Island, where a vast mosque and school had for many generations been frequented by the greatest philosophers and natural scientists in North Africa, were under the shaky command of a crumbling dynasty of Berber Muslims known as the Zirids. The countryside was controlled by various Arab Bedouin tribes sent from Egypt to drive the Zirids out. Political stability was collapsing. Here lay warm and fertile farmlands. There sat prosperous port towns, all ripe for the taking. Roger's counselors thought so, and they had therefore recommended to their testy overlord the proposal of a cousin whom one source names only as Baldwin. This Baldwin had come into possession of a great army of Christian soldiers and was casting around for somewhere godless to conquer. He had asked Roger's blessing to come to Sicily and use it as a launch pad for an invasion of Irafiqua. "I shall be a neighbor of yours," he had explained, as though this were good news. But Roger of Sicily was not feeling neighborly. Irafiqua was undoubtedly ruled by various followers of Islam, he said, but those infidels happened to be sworn partners of the Sicilians in agreements that kept the peace and allowed for a rich exchange of goods in the island's markets and ports. The last thing he wanted, he ranted to his gathered minions, was a cousin imposing on his hospitality, waging a reckless war that would disrupt Sicilian trade if it was successful, and cost him a lot of money in military support if it failed. Irafiqua may indeed have been vulnerable, but if anyone was going to exploit that, it was going to be Roger himself. He had spent the last 2.5 decades, almost his entire adult life, carving out his rule in the region, and it would have been a limp end indeed if he were now to put it at risk, that pursuit of to put it at risk in pursuit of some harebrained scheme cooked up by a kinsman who had never troubled the soil of the island with his sweat. If this Baldwin wanted to fight Muslims, said Roger, he would have to find a different part of the Mediterranean in which to go about his business. There were plenty of places he could name that would be preferable to Sicily's backyard. He summoned Baldwin's personal envoy to his presence and informed him of his decisions. If his master was really serious, he said, then the best way to proceed is to conquer Jerusalem. That is how it all began. Roger, Count of Sicily, was 11th century Europe's ultimate self-made man. He was born around the year 1040 as the youngest of 12 sons sired by a minor nobleman from Normandy called Tancred of Hauteville. Given the protocols of inheritance, being born even as a second son implied a lifelong burden of fortune hunting rather than easy inheritance. To have 11 brothers ahead of you was a disaster. But by the end of the century, the Normans had begun to conquer their way around Western Europe. They took command of Saxon England in 1066. At the same time, southern Italy fell under their gaze, and opportunities that may have seemed limited for younger sons within Normandy itself, but for anyone prepared to travel, opportunity abounded. As a young man, therefore, Roger had left his homeland in what is now northwest France and set out for territory that already called many of his kinsmen and countrymen, the rich but unstable southern Italian regions of Calabria and Apulia. Toe and heel of the Italian boot, Calabria and Apulia were lands where resources were plentiful, authority was contested, and an ambitious young man with a yen for politics and warfare might make his name. Other Normans of the Hauteville clan had already found success here, fighting against the rival superpowers in the region, principally the Byzantine Greeks and Roman popes, both of whom regarded the Normans with suspicion bordering on alarm. The book, Crusaders, The Epic History of the Wars for the Holy Lands by Dan Jones. Here.
Coming up on the Science Revolution this week, entomologist Professor Gard W. Otis is here on the murder hornets. They invade hives and decapitate the bees inside in just a matter of hours, and scientists worry about them gaining a foothold in North America. Beyond nuclears, Kevin Camps drops by on the announcement of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission that it's proceeding illegally with licensing a proposed high-level radioactive waste dump in New Mexico. Plus, author Stephen Hassan on the cult of Trump. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. Tom here with you. Fox News, by the way, telling their employees that you can't come to work until after June 15th. And maybe not then. But their employees are going on TV every night saying, you should get back to work. How weird is this? It's very weird. Anyhow, picking up your phone calls, Jane in Gadsden, Alabama. Hey, Jane, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking my call. Thank you for what you do, too. You get me through this. Did you ever think that we'd be going through this in our older years, supposed to be our golden years, and we're having to do this?
Yeah, good luck on that, yeah. So what's up, Jane?
The reason I called, I've been waiting for my check, and I was going to donate it to, I'm blessed, I'm not well off, but I don't need this check, and I was going to give it to Feeding America, and so, but I got the check, and it's $2,400. Have you heard of anyone else getting double?
Now, I got $2,400, but it was for me and Louise. We filed jointly on our tax return. So do you file jointly with somebody else on your tax return?
Okay, I wondered if it had something to do with my husband. I lost my husband, though, in 2018. And I filed that year. It's already on the books.
Right. I would strongly suggest, Jane, that you set aside $1,200 of that, and because that's what happened is that whoever passed out the checks didn't get it, that your husband had passed away, and set aside that $1,200 and let them know, because they will come looking for it eventually, and you don't want to be in the position of having to pay fines or penalties or whatever. And just let them know if there's a way to do that. But I'm sure that that's what happened. Jane, I got to move on, but thank you for the call, and thanks for your kind words. Have a great afternoon. Gary in Detroit. Hey, Gary, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for taking the call. I agree with you 110% with regard to the way the Democrats have been doing things in terms of posturing in a position of compromise. But frankly, I think it's not just a matter of like them not knowing about negotiations. I think it really is a matter of they don't want to piss off the corporate donors, and so they end up taking these positions. And frankly, if they keep doing this, this is a very dangerous trend. In my view, part of the problem is that the economic fallout that we're going to have from this crisis is going to be so much more considerable than one might imagine. And when that happens, those who have offered solutions that are non-solutions, for example, allowing people to end up paying COBRA or have, something that helps them just with COBRA is not going to be sufficient. And that is something that can potentially lead to either extremists on the right screaming about how the Democrats are not doing something and there not being any sort of alternative. We need to be out there with a progressive alternative, and we need to recognize that part of the reason why FDR did what he did was because there was a radical left. You know, the Communist Party membership during the Great Depression was very considerable. And
as was the Nazis. But yeah, I get your point, Gary. And in fact, what my objection is that, you know, COBRA is not a structural change. It's taking a broken system and just flooding more money into it, which, you know, to some extent was what Obamacare was too. And here's, I mean, you know, to take Rahm Emanuel's famous quote, "Never let a crisis go to waste," which of course has been embraced by people on the right forever. You know, and Naomi Klein wrote a book about it, Disaster Capitalism. But, you know, here we have an opportunity to rethink structural stuff. And while we're passing out trillions of dollars, let's do that. And so, you know, yeah, I completely agree with you, Gary. And yes, there are a lot of Democrats, probably about half the party, you know, in terms of elected officials, who, in order to get elected and reelected and maintain their position of power, have to be taking, or believe that they have to be taking, money from big corporations and you know, fat cats and whatnot, and that compromises the Democratic Party as well. Whereas it's you know, 100% of the Republican Party. Go ahead, Gary.
Right, and if I may, you know, who was the most popular president of the entire 20th century? It was FDR. And what did he do? He did these populist policies, and frankly, that's why the Dems had control as long as they did, except for every once in a while, like, you know, in the late 1940s or with Eisenhower. But even then, Eisenhower was a progressive in comparison to today's Republican, and the Democrats basically had controlled Congress very strongly most of the time up through Reagan. So, you know, the idea...
Well, and that's my point. The Great Depression created the space for that, Gary. You know, had it not been for the Great Depression, you know, FDR would have been yelling into the wind the way Teddy Roosevelt was. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt got some good stuff done. He got the Tillman Act through. You know, he got money out of federal elections. He got, you know, the inheritance tax passed. But that was about it. But FDR was able to do what he was able to do because a third of America was unemployed. Well, guess what? Or 25%. Guess what? We're there again. And this represents a huge opportunity. Gary, I need to move along, but thank you for the call. Lowell in Salem, Oregon. Hey, Lowell, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Sorry I missed Mark Pocan, but, you know, like many bad things from the 80s, from hair bands to superdelegates, unemployment started getting taxed in 1986 with the Tax Reform Act. And, you know, since Republicans love to eliminate taxes, why don't Democrats propose eliminating taxes on unemployment insurance?
And I would add, you know, in '83, Reagan slapped a tax on Social Security benefits. They had never been taxed before that. These were both, you know, wonderful little taxes on average working people that Ronald Reagan put into place to compensate for the billions and billions in today's dollars that he was shoveling out the door to his plutocrat buddies. I'm with you. I'm with you, Lowell. And again, you know, if Democrats want to think big, these are the kinds of things that they could be thinking big about. Thank you for the call. Walt in Ontario, Canada. Hey, Walt, what's up?
Wow. Tom, I've been listening to you for 16 years. Amazing.
Well, thank you.
I just want to say I was born in America, Detroit area, worked for automotive supplier, and I'm amazed you guys cannot do Medicare. Well, I'm not amazed. I know how it works. I know how the Republican Party is. And, you know, we used to listen to you in my man cave for about 7 or 8 years in my last place. And they're never going to.
So you live in Canada now, and you have Medicare for all in Canada. You want to give us a quick snapshot? You know, Americans who don't know what we're talking about here. As an American,
here,
you know,
when I was a
how
kid,
it works
I
there.
Educated here, and then I went to school in the States. And of course, I can work both sides of the border, so I get a job in the U.S. And now, since they've manipulated what they love to call Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, because they use that as a stigmatism. But you know how it was manipulated with the help of Justice Roberts and all, and the fact that I don't use my health care over there because I just got hip. I'm almost 50. I just got a hip replacement last year. It was going to cost me $12,000 with my coverage through my company. That's better than the automotive
in the U.S.
industry. It's amazing. Yeah, amazing.
Whereas in Canada, it would have cost you what?
It didn't cost me nothing. So
you got it done in Canada and it was free?
Yes, and I got to tell you, I've always tried to get a hold of you before. Back years ago, I ripped my nose off my face in a snowmobile accident, and to fill my prescriptions then, because I had a U.S. coverage, and it was different because it not wrapped around what was done through Obamacare, but the manipulation of the medical coverage and how they don't want the public option, the Republican Party. I can tell you I had to fill my prescription, but I had to see my doctor in the U.S., and this guy was in practice. He was 68 years old, and when he look at me, because, I was a mess, he called his partner into the office, and they were all about, hey, there's a problem. You didn't call the 1-800 number. I'm like, what number is that? Well, if you didn't call this before they did this emergency surgery to put my face back together, who's going to pay for this? I said, I'd never seen the doctor before. I said, well, you're not paying attention. I live in Canada, so I pay taxes on both sides of the border. I use my Canadian coverage. Oh, but it still costs. He said, you were in emergency surgery? I said, yeah, a couple hours. They took my nose off my face, put it back on, and you couldn't even tell now, right? And they were both astonished. They said, absolutely no bill. I said, no bill, and a 2-day stay, and sent me home with my stuff. But now I got to fill my prescription, so through my U.S. coverage, that's why I'm here. And those two guys were like, we didn't know it worked that way. And whenever I work for a U.S. employer, and I've worked for 6 of them now, it's always, how can you live in Canada? Are you kidding me? The coverage, they just don't get it that, you're paying 15, which is now 13% sales tax. There's no such thing. Remember, Michigan is the automotive capital of the world with the worst roads on earth. Worst roads in South Africa, and only 30% of the roads are fixed. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is ironic, Walt, speaking as a Michigander. Yeah. Walt, thanks for the call. It's nice to hear from you and to get your perspective and to get the real story on what's going on with Canadian healthcare. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, helping you win the water cooler
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's the home of the political revolution. We'll be right back with your calls. And welcome back. Aaron in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Aaron, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. If one thing that I've learned by this virus is that, that the infrastructure as far as a satellite goes, and as far as, a download speed, we are the worst out here, because I watch these shows because they're being broadcasted from home, and they break up, they freeze, and everything else. But we pay the most.
Yes.
For these for these services. It's like we rank. It depends on the website you go to, but we rank between 22nd and 30th in the world as far as.
40 years of Reaganism has deteriorated America into third world status. The last caller was talking about Michigan has the worst roads in the country. It's true. I believe it's true anyway. They're always filled with potholes. Of course, Michigan has hard winters, but still, no budget basically. And right across our infrastructure. I mean, prior to 1980, we were building new hospitals, we were building new schools, we were building new roads and highways. We were laying high quality telephone service and electric service, even into rural areas. And of course, the analog of that today would be internet. But, Reagan came along and said, no, government can't do things, and we need to cut taxes on billionaires and corporations. And he did that, and it dried up the money for infrastructure. And now we're dealing with bridges that were built 120 years ago and, falling apart, and roads that we can't maintain. And what little broadband infrastructure we have in rural areas is pathetic. You're absolutely right, Eric.
It is. I mean, we actually ranked one better than Slovakia. That's how bad we are.
There you go. I'm with you. Thank you very much, Aaron. Spot on. Nikki in Joplin, Missouri. Hey, Nikki, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yes, I called. I wanted to say I'm really discouraged, and I'm embarrassed sometimes to live in the United States anymore. And it just seems like Trump, even when he does something wrong, he gets off. It's depressing. And I was wondering, what do you really think, or your opinion about what our allies think of us right now?
Oh, it's pathetic. We are the laughingstock of the developed world, and the developing world is looking at us with fear because they're saying, "Whoa, if the shiny city on the hill can be corrupted by its billionaires that easily, what's going to happen to us?" Also, you've got countries around the world that are starting to determine who can come into their country based on whether or not they've got their coronavirus under control. And we're going to be the last country on earth that anybody lets. Americans are going to be the pariahs over the next year or two or three.
They're going to start turning on us because he has been so, he won't work with our allies on anything.
Oh, they already have. I mean, they're going ahead with, trying to do something about climate change. They're going ahead with trying to reduce the poisons in their environment. Other countries in the world are moving ahead with trying to protect their people from coronavirus. Australia, New Zealand, Taiwan, South Korea, China, they've all largely crushed this thing. And, it's us in Brazil. We're the village idiots. It's incredible. Nikki, thank you for the call. Spot on. It is. I won't say I'm embarrassed to be an American. I'm embarrassed that we have Donald Trump as a president and that the Republican Party has the strength that it does. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. Everybody knows about the war that billionaire oligarchs and giant corporations have waged against working class Americans since the Reagan Revolution. But there's a big piece of that most Americans don't know. It has to do with a racist guy named Robert Bork who convinced Congress and the Supreme Court to change our laws about monopolies. You can read all about it in my new book, The Hidden History of American Monopoly, available for pre-sale right now wherever fine books are sold. So it turns out back in November, the spy agencies in the United States were notifying the Trump administration that something's going on in China. Looks like another SARS outbreak. Maybe we should get ready for this. It was ignored. I've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for the supporters of our program that basically goes through the whole timeline, all the way from, actually going back to 2018 when Trump disbanded 3 different anti-pandemic agencies in the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council, and the executive branch. Just closed them down, fired the people. That was the end of that. How he ignored the intelligence in November, he ignored the intelligence in December, he ignored the epidemic now coming into the United States in January, he ignored it in February, just going the blow-by-blow timeline. And I think it's really worth having it all in one place, a good recap, a good summary of this that you can refer to and you can share with your friends. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And William in Jemison, Alabama says you want to disagree with me. About what?
Oh, good Lord. Where do I start? First, your name of your free speech TV, really? And number two, guys, when you make statements about Ronald Reagan, be sure you know what you're talking about. Because Ronald Reagan didn't set that tax up. One of your boys did, named Harry Reid, walked it into his office. And you're talking to a 15-year Green Beret, okay?
You're talking about the tax on unemployment insurance, or are you talking about the tax on Social Security
yeah, that's income? A bunch of bullshit.
Okay, that's it for William. Please go in and hang on just a second. Let me check the call log here. Yeah, William's phone number ends in 2453. So, Joyce, if you would go in and nail that down, please. Johnny in Galveston, Texas, and my apologies to anybody if that slipped through. Johnny in Galveston, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's on your mind today?
No apologies necessary, Tom. Unfortunately, we have too many people like that who are crude and rude. Listen, I had a question while I was on hold. Do you know offhand if the current day GOP austerity that we're suffering under, was that primarily architected during Bush Sr.'s administration, or was that Bush Jr.?
Austerity. Hello? Yeah, I'm trying to remember there were a whole series of budgets that actually, and my recollection happened during the tail end of the Clinton administration, in his battles with Newt Gingrich, and shutting down the government and forcing sequestration and things like that. But Johnny, I'm sorry, I don't want to give you wrong information. I don't have that timeline at the top of my head.
Okay, I'll just have to search it when I get time. The reason I called was I'm in total agreement with you, 200% with you and Cenk Uygur in the way the Democrats historically have lacked negotiation skills, I think on purpose, because they've demonstrated how well they are able to browbeat their potential voting base, people like me, but then they turn around and they kiss up to Republicans all the time. So here's my question for you. In the same way that in the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt and his administration paid Americans to do things like plant trees and such, couldn't the Democratic-controlled Congress not wait for the outcome of this election and start employing young people, college and high school age, to fabricate masks and gowns at home, send them a kit with supplies and a video if they don't have internet access, and we start paying them to do that, and we get some benefit from that for safety for people?
Yeah, I think that Johnny, it's pretty amazing when you think about it that Franklin Roosevelt, we got bombed in Pearl Harbor, and within a matter of weeks, Franklin Roosevelt had car factories making bombers and tanks, had ladies' nylon factories making parachutes, had clothing factories making boots and uniforms. And Donald Trump, it's been 6 months now since we knew the coronavirus was coming, and it was at least since he was warned about it, and since his administration in November warned Israel that this was coming, according to the Israelis. He's had 6 months and he's done none of the above, right? And this is just the simplest stuff. Let's just prevent some of the people working in our hospitals from dying. It's really sad. Johnny, thanks for the call. Sergio in San Antonio. Hey, Sergio, what's up?
Hey, what's going on today?
We're here.
Hello?
What's on your mind?
Hey, I was telling you, I'm in San Antonio now, but I used to live in Amarillo, and the difference in the two places is considerable the way this thing's been handled.
How so?
Well, in San Antonio, the Mayor Nienberg here, has done a good job of shutting the city down. People have participated. They've done what they needed to do, stayed home, stayed away from restaurants and movie theaters and churches. And in Amarillo, they had that flare-up recently, and the mayor opened that up, not last week, but the week before, right in the middle of it. It's a crazy thing to do, but here we are. I think yesterday, if I remember the numbers right, it was almost 190. Now, some of that's due to the additional testing, but still, to open the city up during this time is a crazy thing to do. I was stunned when I heard it.
Yeah, there's basically two narratives that have emerged from this, and sadly they become partisan. The public health narrative, as it were, which the Democratic Party has largely ascribed to, is that this is a deadly virus. We know, there's 100 kids now in New York who are really, really sick from this. 3 of them have died. Children, right? And this is, yes, it's true that it's disproportionately killing old people and black people, but it's also basically killing a whole lot of other people as well. And and here you got Nick Cordero. He just woke up from a coma in this thing. So you've got that one narrative that it's a public health problem, and then you've got the other narrative that it's a Democratic plot to hurt Donald Trump by kneecapping the economy. And which is crazy. It is crazy, and it's being promoted by Rush Limbaugh and these guys on the right. And sadly, it's going to get a lot of people killed. 57 minutes past the hour. We'll be back in just a minute. Stick around, right over the top of the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Money was just enough.
We say fight back! Okay, we're recording now.
So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events, events, that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com.
Today we're reading from David Enrich's book, Dark Towers, Deutsche Bank, Donald Trump, and an Epic Trail of Destruction. This is from Chapter 10. It's titled The Mar-a-Lago Prize. In 1905, a German immigrant living in the Bronx set up a small barber shop on the ground floor of a newly constructed building at 60 Wall Street, in the heart of Manhattan's booming financial district. In an era before skyscrapers, the 25-story L-shaped tower was a landmark, its gargoyle-guarded roof visible from the nearby waterfront. The barbershop thrived, offering shaves and trims to a procession of bankers, stock exchange traders, lawyers, and office workers. Barber's name was Frederick Trump. The same year that he opened the shop, his wife gave birth to a boy named Fred. Many years passed, and the barbershop closed, and the old 60 Wall Street gave way in 1989 to a new 60 Wall Street, a 47-story tower topped with a distinctive pyramid roof. For a time, it was home to J.P. Morgan and Company. Then the bank left, and in 2005, Deutsche Bank started relocating its American staff, displaced ever since 9/11, to its new home at 60 Wall Street. And so Frederick Trump's grandson, born to Fred's wife in 1946, became an occasional visitor to the site of his grandfather's old barber shop. Deutsche's relationship with Donald Trump had only deepened since Mike Offit left. Justice Justin Kennedy, this is the son of Justice Anthony Kennedy, Justin Kennedy, now a managing director, had become a key point contact for Trump and helped chaperone large real estate deals for him through the bank. Kennedy's role was to find customers to buy portions of loans after Deutsche dispensed the money, a process that allowed Deutsche Bank to make larger loans than it otherwise could have. Kennedy sometimes sat with Trump in his luxury box at the U.S. Open tennis tournament or at Manhattan nightclubs, where Trump would park himself at a table in the corner facing outward, holding court like a mafia don. Now, with Kennedy's encouragement, Deutsche hurried along a Henry Villard-like path. In 2000, the bank had plunked down another $150 million to be used for the renovations of Trump's building at 40 Wall Street. The next year, Deutsche agreed to extend Trump a mortgage worth more than $900 million, at the time the largest ever on a single property, so he could buy the General Motors building on the southeastern corner of New York's Central Park. Trump already owned half of the 50-story building. He wanted the rest. And in 2002, Deutsche agreed to refinance about $70 million that he owed on some of his Atlantic City casinos. Those loans came out of Deutsche's commercial real estate division, which Kennedy was helping to run. Not everyone was enamored with Trump. Seth Waugh, W-A-U-G-H, one of Edson's many Merrill Lynch recruits and the head of Deutsche's American operations, learned around 2001 that the bank was planning to lend Trump about $500 million to use as he wished, basically an unrestricted cash infusion to stabilize the developer's flagging finances. Waugh had previously witnessed up close the carnage that Trump could inflict on imprudent financial institutions. At Merrill, Edison had assigned him the task of mopping up after Trump defaulted on nearly $700 million of bonds that Merrill had helped sell for his Taj Mahal casino in Atlantic City. Waugh was in no hurry to repeat the experience at Deutsche. He voiced strong objections to the proposed new loan to Trump, in which Trump would not have had to put up any hard assets as collateral, and the deal soon died. Yet Deutsche's broader Trump relationship rumbled on. In 2003, another arm of Deutsche, focused on helping companies raise money by selling stocks and bonds to investors, agreed to work with Trump. The point man on this part of the relationship was Richard Byrne, another Merrill veteran who had been involved in the Taj Mahal debacle. Byrne had helped sell the ill-fated Taj bonds to investors. Now Trump hired Byrne's group at Deutsche to issue bonds for his troubled Trump hotel and casino resorts. Byrne knew this would be an uphill battle. Not only had Trump defaulted in the past, but he also had recently been taunting investors that he might stop paying back other outstanding bonds. Waugh didn't warn Byrne about the recently rejected $500 million loan, and so Byrne organized a roadshow for Trump to meet with and try to win over big institutional investors. He escorted Trump to meetings all over New York and Boston. At every stop, boardrooms and auditoriums were jammed with traders, fund managers, senior executives, and secretaries curious to see the Donald show, and Trump didn't disappoint. He rocked, he rolled, and he delivered wildly optimistic and inconsistent financial projections. Afterward, Trump called Byrne to ask how much money they'd raised. The answer, alas, was virtually zero. Byrne braced for an explosion as he explained to Trump that though he'd been treated like a celebrity, nobody trusted him with their money. Trump took the rejection in stride. "Let me talk to your salespeople," he requested. Byrne agreed, and Trump came to deliver a pep talk. "Fellas, I know this isn't the easiest thing you've all had to sell," he acknowledged, "but if you get this done, you'll all be my guests at Mar-a-Lago." Trump was always good at pushing an audience's buttons. A weekend with Trump at Mar-a-Lago, bragging rights that not even money could buy, and this new incentive did the trick. The salesman worked the phones, cast a wider net for more clients, and managed to sell an impressive $485 million of junk bonds, albeit at a high interest rate that reflected investors' fears that Trump might default. The book Dark Towers by David Enrich.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So is it time to break up everything big? On the line with us is Sarah Miller, the executive director of the American Economic Liberties Project and the co-chair of Freedom from Facebook. EconomicLiberties.us is the website, and Sarah Miller, DC, is her Twitter handle, SARAH. Sarah, welcome to the program. Tell us about the Pandemic Anti-Monopoly Act.
Sure, Tom. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you. So basically what's happening right now in our economy, whether we like it or not, is this pandemic is allowing large corporations and kind of predatory financial institutions to roll up power, to buy distressed assets, to merge, to kind of bring even more kind of economic and political power to bear on the economy and society. And so what this act would do is essentially just say, we're going to put a timeout on mergers at this point in time when so many businesses are under pandemic-related distress. It's a really common sense merger, common sense bill. It has provisions to kind of mitigate against sort of any kind of problematic aspects of it. And it will help businesses that should be thriving in normal times continue to thrive, and the communities that they support to do so as well.
I think most Americans don't realize what kind of a crisis that we are actually living through as a result of bigness here in the United States, these giant monopolies. We pay more for airfare than most countries in the world, for example. Internet, you can get internet service, well, in France for about $25 a month. You get high-speed internet, 100 MIPS up and down, and you get your cell phone service, and you get 100 channels of cable TV because they've got competition. They allow the company that owns the pipe into your house basically can't also be the exclusive provider to you of television service or of internet access. Those are the smallest examples. I mean, the best estimate is that the average American is spending $5,000 a year extra as essentially a monopoly tax, that we're paying extra for everything from pharmaceuticals to internet service because of these giant monopolies. How do we wake people up to this, and how bad is it compared to the rest of the world, or particularly compared to Europe, where they've been fairly aggressive about preventing these kind of monopolies from emerging?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think what we're seeing now in the context of the kind of economic policy response to this pandemic is an opportunity to have this debate. Big corporations, big banks have access to lending from the Fed. It flows with the push of a button. Smaller businesses, working people have to go through clunky systems that aren't really set up to support them during kind of critical moments like these. So you are seeing kind of in real time the way that our public institutions are oriented around making life easier for the largest economic entities, the most powerful economic entities in the country. And we'll see a whole number of kind of ill effects flowing from that. But, you know, you're exactly right. We are already, previous to this crisis, at a point where large corporate monopolies were extracting wealth from consumers and workers to the tune of $5,000 a year. And you can put that kind of in the context of the $1,200 stimulus check that people are getting. Well, a lot of that is going to go straight out the door to large landlords, to healthcare monopolies, to internet monopolies, with a lot of people working from home, right? So this is the goal of our project here. It is to kind of generate a political movement to take on abusive and extractive monopolies that have come to really control key aspects of our economy and our society.
You've got a couple of real structural challenges in the face of this. You've got the GTE Sylvania Supreme Court decision, in which they finally adopted Robert Bork's theory that monopolies were actually a good thing for economies because, you know, large corporations have greater economies of scale than multiple small companies in the same industry. Then this was adopted by Congress, you know, in a whole variety of different ways. But and largely in 1983, when the Reagan administration stopped enforcing, for all practical purposes, the Sherman Antitrust Act and all of its heirs, the Clayton Antitrust Act, the Anti-Monopoly Act of, I think it was 1954. How do we deal with these structural pieces? You know, the Supreme Court basically endorsing monopoly in the United States, and the incredible damage that the Reagan administration did, which was never undone. It wasn't undone by Clinton or Obama. You know, it's basically still the policy of the U.S. government to allow giant mergers.
Yeah, you're right about that. You certainly know your history on all this stuff. So essentially,
I just wrote a book about it. Well,
one of the positive things I think about this challenge is that there are kind of a range of institutions and tools that you can use to take on concentrated corporate power. Stopping mergers and kind of unwinding mergers is a specific piece of that and a particular problem. But there are kind of so many ways that our institutions are biased towards supporting the largest corporations and big banks and against everybody else. And so what we can do is you can pass legislation that directly addresses questions of market power, like we did after the Depression. You can make new rules at the Federal Trade Commission, which has the authority to do that it doesn't use. State attorneys general can step in. So it's not like there is a one-size-fits-all solution. As part of this overall project, should Congress step in and overturn really bad Supreme Court precedent? Yes, and I think that's something that we need to build power and work to achieve over time. But it is not necessarily true that we have to kind of sit on our hands until Congress acts. I think there are a lot of different avenues to start chipping away at what is a deeply embedded structural problem in our economy right now, and we have to kind of try to continue to find ways to do that. So I think just having the Pandemic Anti-Monopoly Act, as part of this debate and as part of this conversation is an important step forward.
You know, in the Sherman Antitrust Act, Senator Sherman of Ohio first put that forward in 1881. I think it passed in 1890, as I recall, or got signed. But really, that last decade of the 19th century, it largely wasn't used. It wasn't until Teddy Roosevelt came along and really started championing this. And then, you know, the guy who followed him, William Howard Taft, both Republicans. You know, Taft supervised the dismantling of Standard Oil of Ohio. Do you see, or Standard Oil of whatever it was at that time, do you see any Democratic champions who are in a position to be the next Teddy Roosevelt or William Taft, who are willing to put?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say right now things are in a huge amount of flux. I think even before this crisis, there was just a lot of learning going on among progressives in particular on how our economy got so unequal, how our democracy got so weak, and a growing kind of recognition that at the root of a lot of these problems, or certainly kind of adjacent and exacerbating them, are questions around concentrated corporate power and all the kind of pernicious effects that that has on consumers and workers and political participation and just kind of justice in our economy at a fundamental level. So I think what I'm seeing is kind of a growing circle of leaders and of political actors and of businesses and of labor unions who are kind of all beginning to kind of grapple with some of these questions in ways that haven't been done in 40 years. So I don't put my hopes on a single FDR figure necessarily, but I do think that this is a process in which we are re-examining a lot of the fundamental assumptions for the first time in a long time.
Well, thank you for the great work you're doing, Sarah, and keep it up.
Thank you so much.
Really appreciate you dropping by. You're welcome. EconomicLiberties.us is the website. Sarah Miller, the Executive Director of the American Economic Liberties Project and the Co-Chair of Freedom from Facebook. You can tweet her at Sarah Miller, S-A-R-A-H Miller, D-C. And we'll be right back. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And if you are curious, the book that I wrote on this is called The Hidden History of American Monopolies. Available wherever fine books are available. He was on kidney dialysis. He had 2 mini strokes. He had a temporary pacemaker put in to prevent him from having a heart attack, and they had to remove his right leg, all while he was unconscious. This Broadway star, 41 years old, just woke up to discover he's missing a leg, but at least he's still alive. This is something that we all need to take seriously. You know, they're taking it seriously over at the Murdoch Empire. Fox News just notified all their employees that the earliest that they will allow people to come back to work, to stop working from home, is June 15th. So all the Fox shows are being done from people's houses, but they're telling you, you should get back to work. And now you've got the Department of Labor, Eugene Scalia's Department of Labor, Donald Trump's Department of Labor, telling the states, giving specific advice to the states, that now that we have ended the national state of emergency, it expired last week, now that we have ended the national state of emergency, and you and your state can end your state of emergency, the people who are on unemployment right now no longer qualify for unemployment. And if they refuse to go back to work because they're afraid of getting sick and ending up like Nick Cordero, how do you say this? Cordero, yes. Like Nick, then tough. I mean, you know, this is. I mean, they literally laid this out. This was the advice coming from Eugene Scalia. States are strongly encouraged to request employers to provide information when workers refuse to return to their jobs because they're afraid of dying. In other words, don't just cut off their unemployment benefits, prosecute them for unemployment fraud. Meanwhile, this is really sad. Betty Mugina, 47, and a female colleague, they were both working in the trains, right? In the metropolitan underground subways, a railway ticket worker in London. And some guy came up to them and they were wearing masks. Some guy came up to them and said, you know, basically, you know, ranting about how this is all, you know, a hoax and all this kind of stuff. And he spit on them, both of them. Belly is her name. Belly just died of coronavirus, COVID-19. She leaves behind a husband and an 11-year-old daughter. She's 47 years old. Her female colleague is in the hospital right now with COVID. This guy spit on them, and they both got infected. This is the kind of stuff. And now, tomorrow you've got you know, the right-wingers are planning, the Nazis in Michigan are planning on showing up again, or the Klan, I guess. This is the modern-day version of the Klan. They're planning on showing up at the state capitol tomorrow in Michigan. And, you know, what, are they going to scream at the police again? You know, from 5 inches, and then you're going to have cops melting down? And they're saying, oh, bring your weapons. And meanwhile, you know, it's being reported that the Koch brothers are backing off their support for them. Really? I just got an email from FreedomWorks. This is the Koch brothers, you know, group. You know, Barney, Senator Rand Paul for an exclusive Reopen America digital town hall today.
202-808-9925.
Out there pushing the your calls after this.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Decadent Society, How We Became the Victims of Our Own Success by Russ Douthat, a New York Times columnist. And this is from, it's about the middle of his first chapter. This is a subchapter titled The Limits of Neoliberalism. There's no shortage of theories to explain this great stagnation, to borrow a phrase from one of the theorizers, the George Mason University economist Tyler Cowen. And there's also no need to simply choose between them. Like most broad trends, the economic decadence of the developed world is overdetermined, and almost every serious attempt at explanation will contain some element of truth. The most politically appealing theories, the ones animating our populist and socialist insurgencies, tend to blame neoliberalism itself, claiming that the medicine for 1970s stagflation has proven to be poisonous in large doses. The push for ever freer trade has hollowed out Western economies, the argument goes, offshoring productive industries and killing decent jobs, making financiers and knowledge workers rich while the middle class shrinks steadily. Meanwhile, low tax rates intended to spur investment have enabled the rich to keep more of their gains while starving the programs required to protect the poor and boost the working classes. Antitrust policy has become so fixated on the so-called benefits of consolidation, lower prices for consumers, that it has ignored all the ways that market-dominant corporations can warp policies and strangle innovation. And anti-inflationary policies, forged to counteract a crisis that's now generations behind us, have been adopted as a dogma that's now by the West's financial and political elite, which demands fiscal austerity under every circumstance and deprives struggling economies of the cash they need to grow. You don't have to accept every aspect of this argument, and indeed the populists of the left and right disagree about which aspects to stress, to see that it describes a real phenomenon, perhaps not the outright failure of neoliberalism, but diminishing returns from some of its preferred policies, and an overconfidence among the Western leadership class that solutions from the 1970s are permanently applicable. On trade, for instance, the general principle that open markets have more winners than losers led policymakers to assume that this would necessarily happen and to overestimate how quickly communities affected by outsourcing would recover and how swiftly other sectors of the economy could compensate. In particular, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology economist David Autor has argued persuasively that the China shock, the dramatic offshoring that followed Beijing's entrance into the World Trade Organization in 2001, inflicted more economic damage on working-class communities in the United States than many experts anticipated, without generating the compensating growth and job creation expected elsewhere. This is not a knockdown case against free trade, just a case against overconfidence in its incautious application. And the same argument applies to other features of the neoliberal program. It's quite possible that lower tax rates spur growth and innovation when tax rates are cut from 70% highs, but also that a program of permanent upper bracket tax cutting, as practiced by America's Republican Party, won't produce the hoped-for spillover effects among the bottom 95%. It's possible that the initial economic insight that some corporate consolidation could be good for consumers was useful for antitrust decision-making in the 1970s and 80s, but needs to be corrected as monopolies regather. It's possible that a program of deficit reduction and tight money that makes sense when inflation is galloping doesn't make sense when we're closer to deflation. The countries sometimes need a loose monetary policy to fight stagnation, and having a financial overclass too fixated on the perils of a for now imaginary inflation is a recipe for permanently lower growth. Then, alongside this brief against an overextended neoliberalism, there's a more subtle argument, pushed by the more serious sort. I think I skipped a page here. Sort of liberalism that the neoliberal program hasn't so much pushed too far as pushed in the wrong direction. In this argument, we don't need less deregulation, but a different kind than we have, because incumbents and insiders in the West have captured the sprawling regulatory state and used it to freeze out potential competition. The age of stagnation, according to this theory, is the fruit of what Brink Lindsay of the Niskanen Institute and Stephen Telles of Johns Hopkins University describe as a captured economy, in which everything from land use rules to exclusionary zoning to occupational licensing to ever-expanding intellectual property protections to corporate subsidies and tax breaks all converge to create a system that's basically the worst of socialism and the worst of capitalism conjoined. Plutocratic and sclerotic, overregulated and undertaxed, with an upper class enriching itself off rents rather than innovation, and a service class that can't advance beyond its station. The overlap between this more libertarian argument and the left-wing critique of neoliberalism is apparent in one of the texts of the post-financial crisis left, French economist Thomas Piketty's 2013 tome Capital in the 21st Century, which mined centuries worth of statistics to argue that capitalism inherently makes the rich richer because returns on capital will always be higher than simple economic growth unless some powerful force intervenes. The forces that intervened in the 20th century were the Great Depression and 2 world wars, which not only provided the impetus for massive government interventions, but destroyed outright a great deal of capitalist wealth. The book is The Decadent Society by Russ Douthat.
Professor Gard W. Otis is here on the murder hornets. They invade hives and decapitate the bees inside in just a matter of hours, and scientists worry about them gaining a foothold in North America. Beyond nuclears, Kevin Camps drops by on the announcement of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission that it's proceeding illegally with licensing a proposed high-level radioactive waste dump in New Mexico. Plus, Stephen Hassan on the cult of Trump. Find The Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. I'll be back to your calls in just a few moments, but first, on the line with us is the good Paul Ryan, Paul S. Ryan, the Vice President for Policy and Litigation at Common Cause, commoncause.org. The Paul S. Ryan is his Twitter handle. Paul, welcome back to the program, and thank you for joining us today. I wanted to talk to you about Mike Flynn and Bill Barr. Can you start out by giving us a sketch of exactly what were the crimes that Michael Flynn committed as a starting point?
Michael Flynn lied to the FBI when being questioned by the FBI, and he admitted this. So there's no dispute about that fact. He lied, he admitted it, he pleaded guilty, and now DOJ has proposed letting him off the hook anyway.
My understanding is that he lied to the FBI about two things. Number one, that he was in the employ, that he'd taken $500,000 from the government of Turkey, from Mr. Erdogan, to make sure that Turkey's interests were well taken care of. And the other was that he met with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador to the United States, while President Obama was still president, after Obama imposed sanctions on Russia for meddling in the election, and told Kislyak, don't worry, when Trump comes in, we got this under control. And as a result of that, Russia did not retaliate for those sanctions, which was something that pretty much has never happened before. Do I have that right, Paul?
Yeah, that's correct.
So why is this not a crime, according to Bill Barr?
According to Bill Barr, it's not a crime because the things that Flynn lied about, according to Bill Barr, were not material to any legitimate investigation by the FBI or the Department of Justice that was underway at the time he was questioned. And that materiality is part of the crime. That's one of the elements of the crime to which Flynn pleaded guilty.
But wait a minute. You've got a guy who does not hold any federal office. He's working for the Trump campaign. Trump has not been sworn into office yet. Barack Obama is president. And this guy now has access to our most secret classified information because of the job that he's holding, incoming national security advisor. He is taking money, taking $500,000 from Turkey on the down low. Nobody knows about it yet, and he is telling Russia, just ignore the policy of the president of the United States. I mean, I would think that any other normal citizen who was doing those kinds of things in the kind of position he was in, I sure as hell want the FBI to be checking out somebody who is in the employ of a foreign government and who is betraying our government to another foreign government, in that kind of a position. How is that not something the FBI should be looking at?
Yeah, I think Bill Barr's argument here is absurd, so I want to be clear about that. And earlier I was responding to your question of what's Bill Barr's argument. I don't agree with it. I agree with you, Tom. The argument is absurd, but when Barr really has to do some mental gymnastics in order to reach the conclusion that this prosecution should be dropped. And part of his story that he's trying to tell the court, trying to convince the court here, is that the original investigation into Flynn was over any involvement he may have had in Russia's interference in our 2016 election. And that investigation had pretty much wound down by the time the FBI became aware of Flynn's conversations with Russia's ambassador on a different topic. So Barr says, even though this original investigation was legitimate, and an independent inspector general within the Department of Justice has concluded that investigation, the original investigation related to Russia's interference in our elections, was legitimate. Barr says, so this interview didn't have to do with that original purpose for the investigation. Therefore, the interview itself was illegitimate. And anything he said, any lies he told during that interview, therefore, should not be prosecuted. It's a crazy argument. There's no precedent for an argument of this sort being made by the Department of Justice, to my knowledge. It's crazy, and I hope Judge Sullivan rejects it, at least in part. And maybe, if we have time, we can get into a little bit about what the next steps are here.
Well, let's do that right now. Judge Emmett Sullivan has, instead of saying to the Justice Department, okay, thank you very much, you're dropping charges, that's the end of that, Flynn has already pled guilty twice. And my understanding is that a guilty plea is the same thing as a conviction in a court of law. It's the end point of a process, not the beginning of a process. And therefore, even if you say, we don't want him to go to jail anymore, or we don't want to prosecute him anymore, it's already a done deal, isn't it? And Sullivan is opening this thing up to third-party comments.
Yeah, so where things were back in January was that Flynn was on his way to sentencing. He had pleaded guilty. The judge has accepted that guilty plea. Also, it's worth noting that part of that guilty plea was probably a calculus by the FBI. They agreed to this guilty plea in exchange for Flynn's cooperation in the Russia investigation. So he probably could have been, perhaps should have been charged with other crimes, but he got off the hook on those crimes, was only charged with lying to the federal government. He was on his way to sentencing in January. He then asked the judge if he could withdraw his guilty plea, and the judge said, I'll think about it. Rescheduled sentencing for late February, and then decided he wanted to hear some more from the DOJ and Flynn's lawyers, and requested another round of briefing on that question before sentencing. So he indefinitely postponed sentencing. And it's in that context that the DOJ, not only at the 23rd hour, but at the 23rd hour and 59th minute, comes in and says, wait a minute, we're not going to prosecute him. So now what's before Judge Sullivan? Judge Sullivan has a motion to dismiss. He needs to rule on this motion to dismiss from the DOJ, motion to dismiss the charges. DOJ is asking him to do so with prejudice, which would mean that the DOJ in the future, say January or February of next year, if there's a different AG, couldn't go after Flynn for this again. One option and as you mentioned, Judge Sullivan has now asked or invited amicus briefs, amici briefs, friends of the court to come in and say and to argue to the judge whether or not he should grant this motion to dismiss. One option is to grant the motion to dismiss, but to do it without prejudice, leaving open the possibility that charges could be brought again next year with a new attorney general. The other possibility I should also mention is that one other possibility here is Judge Sullivan could just deny this motion to dismiss, and proceed to sentencing. Deny the motion to dismiss, deny the request by Flynn to withdraw his guilty plea, and just sentence Flynn. I think that's less likely than the dismissal, without prejudice that would leave the door open for a future prosecution.
Right. Although there's going to be some strong front of the court briefs, amicus briefs, arguing just that point. We've seen now, today we saw Paul Manafort getting out of jail on a compassionate release. And Michael Cohen, the prisons wanted to let him out because it was just, fit within the guidelines. But apparently Trump said no. And so Michael Cohen gets to stay in jail. It seems to me like what we have here is, between Manafort and Flynn, a cover-up on behalf of Donald Trump. I mean, these guys committed their crimes on behalf of, to some extent, on behalf of Donald Trump. What might Flynn be covering up that Trump doesn't want known, that he's been dangling this pardon over Flynn all these, for a year and a half, 2 years, basically to keep him quiet?
Well, there's a lot that's unknown today about the full extent of President Trump's relationship with Russia, with Vladimir Putin and other Russian agents, with Russian banks, Russian financing for Trump's businesses over the recent decade. So it's hard to say what Flynn might be covering up. But the other thing I want to mention here is that in any other administration, Bill Barr would be on the chopping block for impeachment here. Bill Barr, this isn't Bill Barr's first outrageous move. He's done a lot of crazy, unacceptable things, including meddling in the Russia investigation, including meddling in the Ukraine Gate investigation. Common Cause last year called for Bill Barr's impeachment and removal from office. And I think if it weren't Donald Trump in the White House drawing all the attention with even crazier, less appropriate, or I should say more inappropriate and potentially illegal behavior, we'd be talking about impeachment of Bill Barr, but it's not getting any attention because President Trump himself and his outrageous actions are sucking up all the oxygen in the room.
Well, and let me add to that. In 1992, when Bill Barr was the Attorney General for George Herbert Walker Bush, first he deep-sixed the what was called the Iraq Gate investigation, which was the selling of weapons of mass destruction by the Reagan-Bush administration to Saddam Hussein. And that caused William Safire, the New York Times columnist, to start referring to him as cover-up General Barr. And then look at the December 25th, Christmas Day, New York Times, screaming three-line headline, all caps, giant cover-up, because Bill Barr advised George Herbert Walker Bush to pardon Caspar Weinberger and the other 5 guys that they were prosecuting because they were closing in on George Herbert Walker Bush. Lawrence Walsh had just subpoenaed his diaries, and they were going to nail him for Iran-Contra, and Bill Barr covered that up too. I mean, people have completely forgot about this. You can easily look it up. Anyhow, Paul S. Ryan. Paul, I'm sorry I don't have time for you to respond to my rant there, but I missed my time cue. But thank you so much for dropping by. Vice President of Policy and Litigation at commoncause.org. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Sean, I just lost my audio. Okay. And welcome back. Let's see here. Sandra in Rockport, Texas. Hey, Sandra, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call. I was, when I was talking to your screener,
Sean, I can't hear Sandra.
Hello?
There you go.
Hello?
Yes, just go ahead, Sandra. I'm sorry. We have a couple of seconds of latency here, so just ignore the delay and keep talking.
Okay. I just wanted your opinion. I live in a red state, a red county, and I wanted your opinion about, I keep getting feedback from people regarding the fact that they don't believe the numbers and of the dying, even the numbers of that are sick on the COVID-19. And I keep just feeling, I wish CNN, where they put up numbers, or some organization, as to put a face with this. To have the people that are dying. If we're in a war, let's show those faces.
So, I agree with you, Sandra, and I've been saying this for some time that, Kate Steinle was this woman in California who was accidentally killed by a guy who was a Hispanic fellow who was not here in the country legally. And the right, particularly Fox News and right-wing hate radio, turned her into a saint. I mean, they ask any right-winger, any Fox News person, viewer, who Kate Steinle is, and they can tell you the whole chapter and verse because they put a face on, quote, illegal immigration with her. And we need to be putting a face on, and maybe this, we need to be putting a face on this thing. I mean, maybe this actor, Nick Cordero, would be the guy. I mean, he's 41 years old. He lost a leg to coronavirus. He just woke up after 5 weeks in a coma. And, his life has been forever altered. And, I think you're absolutely right. Do you have recommendations for who we should be, holding up as the poster child?
No, I really don't. I mean, it's so monumental, the mounting daily. And therefore, that's why I say, let's just show a face instead of just those numbers. Let's be revolving a face somewhere. And that's where I wanted your opinion is, where do you go? I'm active in my Democratic Party here, and I'll do whatever it takes, any avenue you think I should go down, to try and get larger organizations or something to start putting that face up there of these people that are dying.
Yeah, we need to be doing that. Sandra, thank you for the call. I'm with you. At a certain level, it's really going to require some sort of coordination from the Democratic Party. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. Thom Hartmann here. Everybody knows about the war that billionaire oligarchs and giant corporations have waged against working class Americans since the Reagan Revolution. But there's a big piece of that most Americans don't know. It has to do with a racist guy named Robert Bork who convinced Congress and the Supreme Court to change our laws about monopolies. You can read all about it in my new book, The Hidden History of American Monopoly, available for pre-sale right now wherever fine books are sold. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. The internet is an imperfect tool, shall we say. And I'm doing the show from home here. We've got Comcast. I'm paying hundreds of dollars a month for Comcast business service at home, but still we get some what are called latency problems. Latency is when it takes a long time for information to pass through the internet. And I'm looking at my delay here right now, and it's showing that it's running 3.5 seconds. Which is pretty mind-boggling. So when I put you on the air, don't ask me a question and then wait. Just go right into it. To our listeners, there will be a pause from time to time and place to place. My apologies for that, but we'll just jump into it. Deborah, New Haven, Connecticut. You are on the air, Deborah. What's up?
Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to give a little insight because this was my problem as well in terms of why there's separations, why staying apart, why these precautions, why leaving work. And I didn't really understand, and I can understand why others don't really understand this either, but maybe this will help. if we pretend, let's just hypothetically say that everybody goes outside and just does anything they want to do. Everybody is just out. There's no precautions, with maybe the exception of gloves and a mask. If that were the case, just imagine if everybody got sick at the same time, from mild to severe. That would completely overrun our hospital system. It would completely overrun our economic. It would just be crazy. So I understand, and maybe this will help other people understand what the staggering, because it's really staggering. You know, we can't have everybody get sick at the same time, because then, I mean, you really wouldn't get treated at a hospital. There would be so many people dying at home. It would be just a disaster. So that may give people a little bit more understanding of why it's so important to keep, one of the reasons why it's so important to keep people away from each other so that the thing does not get out of hand. What do you think, Tom?
Spot on, Deborah. You said it perfectly. And this is, you know, there's really kind of two issues here. Number one is the resilience of our healthcare system. And thank you, Deborah, for that. You said it so well. And of course, the other is that, you know, this is a disease that can kill you. And, you know, and shouldn't just be, you know, taken lightly. Michelle in Lansing, Michigan. Hey, Michelle, my old hometown. What's up?
Go Green. Former Spartan here. So I'm one of the 9.7 million Michiganders that has some good sense and is not protesting against Governor Whitmer. But this thing is ridiculous. It started out that they wanted to garden and thought that they were not allowed to garden. Well, that was BS. And then they said, well, they want to take their boat out. It was 26 degrees. Okay, nobody's taking their boat out. So it was all a bunch of BS to protest that we had a female governor and that she was a Democrat. Well, now it's turned into something completely different. You know, they're carrying guns, they're screaming in the face of police, they're wearing swastikas on their arm. And yesterday, I was watching their crazy site, and one of the things that came up was, we need to teach this Jew governor a lesson. Well, first of all, I don't know if Governor Granholm is Jewish or not. Never been a concern for me. I don't care. But this is clearly no longer about wanting to get out of your house. Yeah, Governor Whitmer. But I'm not sure, you know, they're calling her, you know, the Jew governor, whatever. I call her that woman from Michigan because she's fantastic. But the point is, it's not about getting out of their house. It's not about gardening. It's not about voting. It's about racist, anti-Semitic, you know, anti-Semitism. That's all it's about. They hate Democrats, they hate Jews, they hate black people. If you put 200 black guys on the steps of the Capitols with AR-14s, these people who are protesting right now would lose their effing minds. They would go crazy. All you have to do is think back to the Black Panthers. One other thing, one of the guys was holding a sign that said, and you're going to freak out when you hear this one, "My body, my choice." Wait a minute. How come it's never my body, my choice as a female, but it's your body, your choice during COVID-19? Right. What the heck is wrong with these people? They've all lost their minds. Don't let anybody tell you it's about the quarantine, because it's not.
Yeah, I'm with you, Michelle, and very well said. Thank you very much. Dwayne in Warren, Michigan. Hey, Dwayne, you got the last minute of the show. What's up?
Hey, Tom, Professor, my pleasure speaking with you. I'm following right in that same vein. Those clowns over there with their AR-15s, the senators, state senators, were starting on a law to ban firearms in the Capitol, and I guess they were getting death threats. And I'm like, oh, can't the state police find these people? I mean, I don't know how they did it. They shouted them down, or whether they called them or what. But I mean, that's ridiculous. Look, they tabled it, and they're not even going to do it.
Yeah, what we're looking at here, Dwayne, is domestic terrorism. You're looking at, you know, crass intimidation. specifically, and it's wrong. It's just it's un-American. I mean, it's classically the way the Klan behaved, but it's not. It doesn't reflect American values. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, take good care of yourself and help out our democracy. And be sure to tell friends, neighbors, acquaintances, anybody who will listen how they can find good progressive media. There's a lot of it out there. So get out there, share the word, tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.